The hurricane was minutes from landfall when my own parents locked me out in the storm. I stood on the porch of their beachfront mansion, rain lashing my face as my mother looked at me through the reinforced glass. She mouthed the words, "Learn some respect," and pushed the button to lower the metal storm shutters, sealing me outside to face the deadly storm surge alone. My name is Avery. I am 33 years old, and I work as a data privacy consultant. My family thought I was just the quiet, obedient scapegoat they could discard when I stopped serving their needs. They had no idea that surviving this storm would be the beginning of their absolute ruin. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to survive the toxic people who were supposed to protect you. The wind was deafening. It was a Category 4 hurricane tearing up the South Carolina coast, a monster of nature that the meteorologists had been warning us about for days. I was standing on the expansive wrap-around porch of my parents' multi-million-dollar beachfront estate. The sky was an unnatural bruised purple, and the rain was blowing completely horizontal, biting into my skin like thousands of tiny needles. The ocean, which usually looked so serene from this expensive vantage point, was churning into a violent gray wall of water, rapidly eating up the private beach and creeping toward the dunes. I pounded my fists against the reinforced impact glass of the double French doors. My knuckles throbbed with the force of my blows, but the sound was entirely swallowed by the roaring wind. Through the thick, expensive glass, I could see them. My family. They were standing in the vast, elegantly decorated living room, bathed in the warm yellow glow of the backup generator lights. The contrast between my reality and theirs was staggering. I was drenched to the bone, my clothes plastered to my freezing skin, fighting for every breath in the suffocating wind. They were completely dry, comfortable, and safe. I saw my father Gregory standing near the marble fireplace, his arms crossed over his chest, looking at me with an expression of mild annoyance. Beside him was my golden child brother Preston, casually checking his phone as if a deadly storm was not actively threatening his sister just a few feet away. And then there was Brittany, my beautiful and perpetually pampered sister, clutching one of her precious designer handbags, glaring at me with raw contempt. I slammed my hands flat against the glass again, screaming for them to open the door. The water was already cresting over the seawall at the edge of the property. The storm surge was happening faster than anyone had predicted. The wind howled so loudly it felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. I made eye contact with my mother, Barbara. She was standing perfectly still in her pristine cashmere sweater, a stark contrast to the absolute chaos swirling around me. I pleaded with my eyes. I yelled until my throat tore, begging her to undo the lock. Instead of reaching for the handle, my mother took a slow, deliberate step toward the glass. She did not look worried. She did not look panicked. She looked triumphant. She stopped just inches from the glass, looking right into my terrified eyes. Her face contorted into a cold, calculated sneer that I had seen 1,000 times throughout my childhood, usually right before she delivered a punishing psychological blow. But this was not a childhood grounding. This was not a cruel comment at a dinner party. This was a Category 4 hurricane. She leaned in close to the glass. I could read her lips perfectly as she enunciated each syllable. Learn some respect. Then she raised her hand and pressed her finger against the smart home control panel mounted on the wall next to the door. A heavy mechanical groan vibrated through the deck beneath my feet. I looked up and saw the thick industrial-grade metal storm shutters beginning to descend from the porch ceiling. They were dropping slowly, a creeping curtain of solid steel, designed to withstand flying debris and crushing water pressure. They were designed to seal the house completely, turning it into an impenetrable fortress. And my mother was lowering them, while I was still standing on the outside. No. I screamed the word, throwing my body against the glass. I clawed at the descending metal, but it was smooth and unyielding. The gap between the bottom of the shutter and the porch floor was closing rapidly. 3 feet, 2 feet. Through the shrinking gap, I saw my mother turn her back and walk away to join the rest of the family. They were going to sit in their plush living room, perhaps pour a glass of wine, and ride out the storm while their daughter was left to be swept away by the Atlantic Ocean. 1 foot. The darkness inside the shutter began to eclipse the warm light from the house. 6 inches. I fell to my knees, screaming for my father, screaming for anyone to hit the stop button. The heavy metal met the concrete deck with a sickening final thud. The automated locking mechanism clicked into place with a sharp metallic snap. I was plunged into semi-darkness, trapped between the impenetrable steel wall of the house and the raging deadly storm outside. The noise of the hurricane was absolute now. With the visual connection to the inside severed, the reality of my isolation crashed over me. The wind shrieked through the architectural columns of the porch, tearing at the outdoor furniture. A heavy teak lounge chair was lifted into the air like a piece of paper and hurled over the railing, vanishing into the gray mist. I backed away from the steel shutters, stumbling toward the thickest concrete pillars supporting the roof of the porch. I wrapped my arms around the rough stone, pressing my body as flat as I could against it to avoid the flying debris. The storm surge was accelerating. The water had breached the lower deck stairs and was pooling rapidly across the dark mahogany planks of the porch. Freezing, salty water washed over my shoes, swirling around my ankles. It was not just rain anymore. The ocean was coming for the house. As I huddled there, shivering violently, the sheer magnitude of what had just happened began to override my physical panic. My parents had locked me out. My own mother had looked me in the eyes and condemned me to death for being disrespectful. All my life, I had endured their conditional love, their favoritism toward Brittany and Preston, their constant gaslighting and emotional manipulation. I had played the role of the dutiful, quiet daughter, swallowing my pride and my own needs just to keep the peace. I had driven through a mandatory evacuation zone to come help them secure this very house, and this was my reward. The cold water rose to my shins. A piece of a shattered palm tree slammed into the far end of the porch, splintering the expensive wooden railing into jagged shards. I squeezed my eyes shut, gasping for air as the wind tried to tear me away from the pillar. I realized then that if I died on this porch, they would spin it as a tragic accident. They would tell everyone that I had foolishly run outside, that the shutters had malfunctioned, that they had tried to save me but were held back by the storm. They would play the grieving parents at my funeral, accepting casseroles and condolences, completely secure in their lie. A hot, burning anger ignited in the center of my chest, cutting through the freezing rain and the paralyzing terror. I refused to let them write my ending. I refused to be the pathetic scapegoat who died begging at their back door. I tightened my grip on the concrete pillar, fighting the terrifying pull of the rising water. The ocean surged again, reaching my knees. The roar of the storm was a continuous, deafening train horn in my ears. I needed higher ground, but there was nowhere to go. The porch was elevated, but the storm surge was predicted to reach 15 feet. I was completely trapped. The water was rising fast. It was no longer just pooling on the deck. It was flowing, creating a strong current that tugged violently at my legs. I could taste salt and mud in the air. The sky grew darker, transitioning from a bruised purple to a terrifying pitch-black gray. The center of the hurricane was closing in. I looked at the steel shutters that separated me from safety. I hated those shutters. I hated the wealth they represented, the arrogant belief that my parents could buy their way out of natural disasters just as easily as they bought their way out of moral obligations. They were inside, completely insulated from the consequences of their actions, while I was left to drown in the dark. Every time the wind gusted, the entire porch shuddered beneath me. I could hear the structural beams groaning in protest. The water reached mid-calf, cold and unforgiving. Debris scraped against my legs, unseen hazards hidden in the churning floodwaters. I had to focus on my breathing. Panic would kill me faster than the water. I pressed my face against the cold, wet concrete of the pillar, trying to shield my eyes from the stinging rain. I thought about my life back in the city, my quiet apartment, my steady career. A life I had built entirely on my own, far away from their toxic influence. I had broken my own rule by coming back here today. I had broken my own rule by believing that in a moment of true crisis, blood would mean something. They had proven me wrong in the most absolute way possible. As the water surged higher, reaching my thighs, I knew that the next few minutes would dictate whether I lived or died. I clung to the pillar, my muscles screaming in protest, my fingers numb and bleeding. The storm raged on, completely indifferent to the human betrayal that had left me at its mercy. I was alone in the hurricane, locked out by the people who gave me life, facing the violent wrath of the ocean, with nothing but my own determination to survive. My fingers dug into the porous concrete of the pillar. The water surging against my thighs was freezing, a relentless current trying to drag me into the black ocean. I shifted my weight, pressing my shoulder blade into the stone to anchor myself. As I twisted, a hard rectangular edge dug sharply into my hip. My phone. I wedged my left arm around the pillar and used my right hand to force my frozen fingers into my soaked pocket. I pulled out the device. The heavy-duty waterproof case I had bought for my fieldwork was scratched and battered from the flying debris, but when I pressed the side button, the screen flared to life. The sudden brightness was blinding in the dark chaos of the hurricane. The water droplets on the screen distorted the text, but I did not need to see clearly to know what was there. The group chat was still open. The messages from 30 minutes ago were burned into my memory, a digital transcript of my own family discarding my life. I wiped the screen against my wet shirt, shielding it with my body. There it was. The family group chat titled Beach House Prep, a completely ironic name considering I was the only one who had actually done any prepping. I had driven my customized lifted SUV through miles of bumper-to-bumper evacuation traffic just to help them. My father had refused to hire storm professionals, claiming local contractors were just trying to scam wealthy homeowners. So I had come. I had spent 3 hours hauling heavy outdoor furniture, taping glass, and securing loose items, while they sat inside complaining about the spotty internet connection. When I finally stepped into the marble foyer, drenched in sweat and rain, I found my sister Brittany in the middle of a full-blown meltdown. She was surrounded by a mountain of bright orange designer boxes and quilted leather dust bags. Her entire collection of luxury handbags was piled on the imported rugs. The text messages on my screen documented the exact moment the madness shifted from a tantrum to a hostage situation. Brittany had texted the group chat while standing barely 10 feet away from me. "Avery is being completely unreasonable. Dad, tell her to give me the keys to her truck right now. I cannot fit my collection in my car, and the leather will be ruined if water gets in the trunk." I stared at the glowing screen as the freezing ocean water rose to my waist. I remembered looking at Brittany in the foyer, thinking she had to be joking. Her luxury sports coupe had barely 3 inches of ground clearance. It was a car meant for sunny drives to the country club, not navigating flooded coastal roads during a mandatory evacuation. I read my own reply on the screen. "I am not giving you my vehicle. I need the ground clearance to get back to the mainland safely. You can fit your most expensive bags in your car and leave the rest on the second floor. We need to leave right now." My rational response had been the match that lit the powder keg. I remembered the sound of my father's heavy footsteps marching down the grand staircase. Gregory did not ask what was going on. He immediately took Brittany's side, as he had done every single day for the past 33 years. The next message in the thread was from him. "Avery, stop bullying your sister. She has highly valuable assets to protect. Hand over the keys to the SUV immediately. You can drive her car back to the city." I swiped the screen with a trembling thumb, the rain violently striking the back of my hand. I remembered standing in that foyer water, dripping from my jacket, onto their pristine floor, feeling a profound sense of disbelief. I had looked my father right in the eyes and explained the reality of the situation. I told him the coastal highway was already experiencing 2 feet of standing water. If I took Brittany's low-riding sports car, the engine would flood within the first mile. I would be stranded on a drowning road in the middle of a Category 4 hurricane. His response was forever preserved in the next text message. "Stop exaggerating and being so dramatic. Hand her the keys. It is the least you can do after bringing so much negative energy into this house today." Negative energy. I had secured their multi-million-dollar property while they panicked over handbags. and I was the one bringing negative energy. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. Then my mother had chimed in. Barbara text sat at the very bottom of the screen, the final digital nail in the coffin. You always ruin everything, Avery. You are so incredibly selfish. Give your sister the keys right now or get out of my house. The memory of the screaming match that followed played in my mind, louder than the roaring wind. I had stood my ground. For the first time in my life, I refused to be their sacrificial lamb. I told them I was leaving with my keys and my own vehicle. I turned my back on them, grabbed my heavy raincoat, and stepped out the front doors onto the expansive porch, fully intending to run to my truck and drive away. But they had been one step ahead of my escape. As soon as I stepped onto the porch, I heard the heavy electronic deadbolt slam shut behind me. I turned around to find the doors locked. I reached for the handle, assuming it was a mistake, but the red security light glared back at me. I had pounded on the glass. My father stood on the other side, his face contorted with rage. He shouted through the thick pain, his voice muffled but entirely clear in its intent. You want to act like a defiant brat, you can stay out there until you learn your place. Slide the keys through the mail slot, or you ride out the storm on the deck. It was an ultimatum born of pure toxic entitlement. They honestly believed I would surrender my only means of survival just to get back into their good graces. They thought the fear of the storm would break my spirit, forcing me to hand over the keys so Brittany could save her precious bags. They expected me to beg to apologize for being selfish and to accept my role as the disposable daughter who would gladly risk drowning in a flooded sports car so her sister could travel in comfort. I refused. I had stared back at my father through the glass and shook my head. I held my keys tightly in my fist and stepped away from the door. I thought it was a sick bluff. I truly believed that once the wind picked up and the danger became real, they would open the door. They were my parents. They might be cruel, they might be narcissistic, but I did not believe they were actual murderers. I was wrong. 30 minutes later, the ocean had breached the seawall. The wind had escalated to terrifying speeds, and Barbara had walked to the glass, sneered at me, and lowered the metal storm shutters. I shoved the phone back into my waterproof pocket and zipped it shut. The water was surging higher now, crashing against my stomach. The freezing temperature was beginning to sap the strength from my muscles. My body shivered uncontrollably, my teeth chattering so hard, my jaw ached. The porch was a swirling vortex of trapped water and flying debris. I could hear the expensive outdoor kitchen being ripped apart by the wind, heavy appliances groaning as they were dragged across the concrete. The betrayal settled deep in my bones, colder than the ocean water. They had not just kicked me out. They had systematically trapped me. They knew the storm surge was coming. They knew the wind would make it impossible for me to walk to the main road. They had locked the doors, secured the shutters, and left me exposed to the deadliest forces of nature simply because I refused to hand over my car keys for a pile of leather purses. The sheer absurdity of it fueled the fire burning in my chest. My life was worth less to them than Brittany designer accessories. My safety was an inconvenience. My boundaries were viewed as disrespectful defiance, punishable by death. A massive wave slammed into the supporting pillars of the house, sending a violent tremor through the concrete I was clinging to. The water level surged to my chest, lifting me slightly off my feet. I tightened my grip on the pillar, scraping the skin off my forearms. I had to angle my face upward to keep the crashing waves from filling my mouth and nose. I realized that the water would not stop rising until the storm passed, and the eye of the hurricane was still miles away. The porch would soon be completely submerged. If I stayed pinned against this pillar, I would drown. If I let go and tried to swim, the current would drag me out into the open ocean or smash me against the jagged wreckage of the neighborhood. I was out of options. I was completely cornered by nature and by my own blood. Another powerful gust of wind shrieked through the darkness, sounding like a chorus of screaming voices. I closed my eyes and fought to maintain my grip as the water tried to pry my fingers loose. I focused all my remaining energy on the anger, using the pure distilled rage of their betrayal to keep my heart pumping. I would not die here. I refuse to let Barbara Gregory and Brittany win. I refuse to let my death be a convenient tragedy that they could exploit for sympathy at their high society luncheons. Suddenly, a blinding flash of light cut through the oppressive darkness. It was not lightning. It was a steady, piercing beam sweeping through the sheets of horizontal rain. I squinted against the glare, my heart hammering against my ribs. Through the torrential downpour, a massive silhouette emerged from the floodwaters on the street. It was moving steadily against the current, pushing a bow wave of dark water ahead of its reinforced grille. The headlights illuminated the churning debris, cutting a path directly toward the flooded driveway of my parents' estate. I tightened my hold on the pillar, staring in absolute shock as the impossible shape drew closer. The heavy-duty tactical vehicle did not just drive through the floodwaters, it conquered them. It was a massive matte black armored SUV, the kind of machine built for war zones and apocalypse scenarios, sitting atop heavily modified suspension and massive treaded tires. The water that was currently threatening to drown me only reached the middle of its reinforced wheel wells. The engine let out a low, powerful growl that I could feel vibrating in my chest even over the shrieking wind of the hurricane. It pushed through the wreckage of my parents' front yard, crushing the remnants of their expensive landscaping beneath its weight. A massive oak tree that had snapped in half lay across the driveway, but the SUV did not even hesitate. The steel push bumper shattered the thick branches, clearing a path directly to the edge of the submerged porch. I clung to the concrete pillar, my vision blurred by the stinging salt water and rain. My chest heaved with exhaustion. My muscles were locking up from the freezing temperature. The water was now lapping at my collarbone. I had maybe 3 minutes left before the ocean swallowed the porch entirely. I stared at the black vehicle, praying it was a swift water rescue team dispatched by the county. The SUV stopped parallel to the porch. The tinted passenger window rolled down exactly 2 inches. It was just enough to let the violent wind howl into the cabin, but the person sitting in the passenger seat did not flinch. I blinked against the driving rain, trying to focus my desperate gaze on the dark opening. I expected to see a paramedic in high-visibility waterproof gear. Instead, I saw a woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair, wearing a pristine cream-colored cashmere coat. Her posture was completely rigid, projecting an aura of absolute authority that commanded the space around her. It was Constance, my grandmother. The shock hit me harder than the freezing water. Constance was the matriarch of the family, the architect of the $2 billion empire my father and brother were so desperately waiting to inherit. She was 8, 2 years old, notoriously ruthless in business, and completely estranged from me for the past decade. My parents had spent years carefully managing her access to me, spinning a narrative that I was a troubled, rebellious disappointment who wanted nothing to do with the family legacy. They kept me isolated from her, ensuring I could never contradict their perfect fiction. I had not spoken a single word to her since my college graduation, yet here she was sitting in an armored tank in the middle of a Category 4 hurricane. Constance did not yell over the storm. She did not panic. She slowly turned her sharp, pale blue eyes toward the fortified house. She looked at the heavy steel storm shutters that my mother had lowered. She looked at the submerged designer patio furniture, the shattered glass, and the rising black water. Her gaze analyzed the scene with the terrifying precision of a predator identifying its prey. Then she turned her eyes back to me. She saw my bleeding hands gripping the concrete. She saw the water rising to my neck. She saw the absolute betrayal my parents had subjected me to. Constance pressed a button on the door panel. Her voice projected through a marine-grade external speaker mounted on the grille of the vehicle. It cut through the roaring wind with crystal-clear, absolute authority. Enough. The heavy rear passenger door swung open. The interior lights illuminated the dark water, offering a golden beacon of survival. A man in tactical gear leaned out from the back seat, extending a thick rescue strap toward me. I had to let go of the pillar. The realization terrified me. The current swirling across the porch was violently strong. If I slipped, the water would drag me under the armored vehicle and pull me out into the raging street. But staying meant certain death. The ocean was already cresting over the seawall in massive sweeping waves. I locked eyes with Constance. She gave me a single sharp nod. I let go. The current grabbed me instantly. It was like being hit by a freight train. The freezing water ripped my feet from the concrete deck and swept me sideways. I thrashed wildly, fighting to keep my head above the churning foam. Debris slammed into my ribs, knocking the breath from my lungs. I reached out blindly, my fingers slipping on the wet metal of the SUV running board. The man in the back seat lunged forward, grabbing the collar of my heavy raincoat. His grip was like a vice. With a powerful heave, he hauled me out of the crushing water and dragged me over the threshold into the cavernous rear cabin of the vehicle. The heavy armored door slammed shut behind me. The sudden silence was deafening. The thick ballistic glass and soundproofed cabin completely muted the raging hurricane outside. The roar of the wind was reduced to a dull background hum. The violent, chaotic world of the storm was instantly replaced by the smell of expensive leather, climate-controlled warmth, and absolute safety. I collapsed onto the floorboards, coughing up harsh, burning mouthfuls of salt water. My entire body shook violently. I hugged my knees to my chest, gasping for air, staring blindly at the pristine floor mats as a puddle of ocean water formed beneath me. A thick, heated blanket was draped over my trembling shoulders. The man in tactical gear secured a heavy seatbelt around me, buckling me safely into the plush leather seat. I looked up, still struggling to process the reality of my rescue. Constance sat in the front passenger seat, looking straight ahead through the rain-battered windshield. She did not offer me a hug. She did not offer me sweet, comforting words. Constance was not that kind of grandmother. She was a woman forged in corporate warfare, and she recognized an act of war when she saw one. Drive, she instructed the man behind the wheel. The driver, a broad-shouldered security specialist, shifted the massive vehicle into gear. I turned my head to look out the reinforced window. As the armored SUV reversed away from the porch, a colossal wall of dark water surged over the property line. It crashed against the house with catastrophic force. The concrete pillar I had been clinging to just 60 seconds ago was obliterated, snapping under the crushing weight of the ocean. The water smashed against the steel storm shutters, violently flooding the lower deck and completely submerging the spot where I had been trapped. If Constance had arrived 1 minute later, I would be dead. My parents would have succeeded. They would have swept my death under the rug, playing the tragic victims of a natural disaster while enjoying the safety of their fortified mansion. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I survived. I was breathing. The realization sparked a profound shift within my mind. The dutiful, quiet daughter who had driven into a hurricane to save her ungrateful family died on that flooded porch. The woman sitting in the back of this armored vehicle was entirely different. Constance turned around in her seat to look at me. Her pale blue eyes were analytical, stripping away the wet clothes and shivering frame to assess the person underneath. She noted the fury burning in my expression. She saw the exact moment my fear transformed into calculated rage. "They locked you out," she stated. It was not a question, it was a cold, hard fact being entered into the record. I pulled the heated blanket tighter around my shoulders. My teeth chattered so hard I could barely speak, but I forced the words out. Yes, because I refused to give Brittany my truck for her handbags. Constance let out a sound that was half scoff, half bitter amusement. Her face hardened, the lines around her mouth deepening with a terrifying resolve. She turned her gaze back to the flooded mansion fading into the storm behind us. "For 10 years, Gregory and Barbara have spun a very compelling story about you." Constance said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "They told me you were erratic. They told me you were unstable and hateful. They demanded I keep my distance for my own peace of mind. I always suspected they were managing the narrative to protect their own interests. But today they showed their hand." She reached into the center console and retrieved a sleek black tablet. She tapped the screen with a manicured finger, her demeanor entirely businesslike. "They thought the storm would do their dirty work." Constance continued, her eyes fixed on the glowing screen. "They thought they could discard you like trash and inherit my empire without a single dissenting voice to challenge them. They made a critical error, Avery. They underestimated my intelligence and they severely underestimated your will to survive. I stared at the back of her pristine cashmere coat, the reality of her words washing over me. Constance was not just rescuing me from the floodwaters. She was recruiting me. She saw through the decades of gaslighting and manipulation that my parents had orchestrated. She recognized the precise nature of their cruelty. "We are going to my inland estate," Constance declared, not looking back. "The property is on the highest elevation in the county. We have independent power grid, satellite uplinks, and a full security detail. We will wait out the storm there." And then I asked, my voice finally steadying. Constance met my eyes in the rearview mirror. The reflection captured a terrifying promise. And then she said coldly, "We lock them out of everything else." The armored SUV surged forward, its massive tires gripping the flooded road, pushing through the debris with unstoppable force. I leaned back against the headrest, the heated seat warming my freezing skin. Outside the thick ballistic glass, the hurricane continued to tear the coastline apart. Houses were being shredded, trees were snapping, and the ocean was swallowing everything in its path. But inside the quiet cabin of the vehicle, a different kind of storm was gathering. A storm of precision, legal warfare, and absolute ruin. My family had left me to drown in the dark. They had no idea I was about to return as a tidal wave. 3 days had passed since the hurricane tore through the coast. The violent winds and crushing waves were gone, replaced by a sky of brilliant, deceptive blue. I stood at the expansive glass windows of the guest suite in Constance Inland Estate, watching the morning sun reflect off the perfectly manicured lawns. The silence of the property was absolute, broken only by the distant steady hum of commercial-grade backup generators. My physical wounds were healing. The deep scrapes on my forearms had scabbed over, and the brutal ache in my ribs from being battered by the ocean current was fading into a dull throb. But my mind was sharper than it had ever been in my entire 33 years of life. The fear that had paralyzed me on that flooded porch was completely gone. It had been washed away by the storm, leaving behind a cold, calculated clarity. I turned away from the window and walked down the sweeping mahogany staircase. Constance Estate did not operate like a normal home. It functioned like a fortified corporate headquarters. Security personnel in dark suits stood at discreet vantage points monitoring the perimeter. The architecture was imposing, designed to intimidate and protect. It was the perfect staging ground for what was about to happen. I found Constance in the formal dining room. She sat at the head of a massive walnut table, sipping black coffee from a bone china cup. She wore a tailored charcoal suit, her silver hair perfectly styled, looking as though she was about to address a boardroom of terrified executives. Seated to her right was a man I had not met yet. He looked to be around my age, perhaps a year or two older. He wore a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to the elbows and a dark blue tie loosened at the collar. He was reviewing a stack of printed satellite images and property reports. When I walked into the room, his dark eyes snapped up to meet mine. His gaze was incredibly sharp, assessing me with an intense, unwavering focus. "Avery," Constance said, her voice echoing slightly in the large room. "Please sit down. We have work to do. This is Liam. He is my lead corporate attorney and the only person in my legal department authorized to handle my private family affairs. He answers directly to me, and as of today, he answers to you as well." Liam stood up and offered his hand. I took it, noting his firm, professional grip. "I am glad you made it out of that storm, Avery," he said. His voice was low and steady, carrying an undercurrent of absolute confidence. "Your grandmother has briefed me on the situation at the beach house. I have spent the last 48 hours gathering intelligence on your parents' current status." I sat down in the high-backed leather chair across from him. "Tell me everything," I said. Liam slid a high-resolution satellite photograph across the polished wood table. The image showed my parents' beachfront neighborhood. The devastation was catastrophic. Entire houses had been swept off their foundations. But right in the middle of the wreckage stood my parents' fortified mansion. The structural integrity of the house had held just as my father had boasted it would. The reinforced steel storm shutters that had nearly sealed my death warrant had successfully protected the upper floors from the wind. However, Liam continued tapping a silver pen against the photograph. They made a massive miscalculation regarding the storm surge. Your father refused to elevate the primary garage and the new ground floor entertainment wing. He claimed the seawall would hold. It did not hold. The ocean breached the property line and completely submerged the entire first level in 6 feet of corrosive salt water. I stared at the image, visualizing the destruction. What about their vehicles? I asked. Liam smiled slightly, a cold, predatory expression that matched Constance perfectly. Completely destroyed, he confirmed. Brittany luxury sports coupe and your parents' 2 high-end sedans were parked in the lower garage. They are total losses. The salt water destroyed the engines and fried the electrical systems beyond repair. Furthermore, I pulled their insurance records. Your father allowed the flood insurance on the ground floor to lapse 3 months ago to save money on premiums. He assumed the standard hurricane policy would cover any damage. He was wrong. The structural repairs and the loss of the vehicles will be entirely out of pocket. A strange sense of poetic justice washed over me. Brittany had demanded my truck to save her designer handbags. My father had locked me out to punish me for not surrendering my vehicle. Now their precious luxury cars were nothing but waterlogged junk sitting in a ruined garage while my heavy-duty SUV was safely parked in Constance's inland compound. Constance reached into her pocket and placed a brand-new smartphone on the table in front of me. Your previous device was damaged by the salt water, she said. I had my tech team procure a replacement and restore your data from your cloud backup. Your accounts are secure. I suggest you look at your recent messages. I believe your father has been trying to reach you. I picked up the phone. It was fully charged and synced to my private network. The screen lit up displaying dozens of notifications. There were no frantic text messages asking if I was alive. There were no desperate voicemails from my mother begging for forgiveness. There was no sign that they had spent the last 3 days worrying that their daughter had drowned on their porch. Instead, there were 14 missed calls from my father, all placed within the last 12 hours, right after the floodwaters had receded enough for them to assess the damage to their property. I opened the voicemail app. There was one new message from Gregory. I placed the phone in the center of the table and pressed the speakerphone button so Constance and Liam could hear exactly what kind of people we were dealing with. My father's voice filled the quiet dining room. He did not sound relieved. He did not sound panicked about my safety. He sounded absolutely furious. Avery. Where the hell are you? Gregory demanded, his voice thick with self-righteous anger. We have been trying to reach you all morning. You completely abandoned us. You took your truck and ran away like a coward right before the storm hit the hardest. We had to ride out the hurricane in the dark while the entire bottom floor of our house flooded. I stared at the phone, my jaw clenching. He was already rewriting history. He was entirely ignoring the fact that he had locked the door and trapped me outside. In his twisted, narcissistic mind, my survival was somehow an act of abandonment. Your sister cars are ruined, my father. Voice continued rising in volume. The entire garage is destroyed. We cannot get any local contractors to come out here without a massive cash deposit, and the banks are taking too long to process our insurance claims. You owe us for leaving us stranded. I need you to wire $50,000 to my joint checking account immediately. Do not ignore this, Avery. You caused this mess by refusing to help your sister. Send the money today or you will regret it. The voicemail ended with a sharp click. The dining room was dead silent. I looked at Constance. She was taking a slow sip of her coffee, her expression completely unreadable, but her eyes burned with a dangerous, icy light. Liam shook his head, leaning back in his chair. That is genuinely remarkable, he said, his voice laced with professional disgust. The man locks his own child outside during a catastrophic weather event, assumes she somehow survived and escaped, and his first instinct upon getting cell service is to demand $50,000 for home repairs. He is bleeding cash, Constance stated bluntly. Gregory has always lived vastly beyond his means, relying on credit and the assumption that he would eventually inherit my wealth to cover his debts. He does not have $50,000 in liquid assets to pay the emergency contractors. He knows you have a successful consulting firm, Avery. He assumes you have the cash and he expects you to hand it over out of pure conditioned obedience. I reached forward and picked up the phone. My fingers were steady. There was no hesitation left in my heart. For years, I would have internalized that voicemail. I would have felt a crushing wave of guilt, wondering if I truly was a bad daughter. I would have questioned my own reality, wondering if maybe I had somehow caused the situation. I would have emptied my savings account to fix their problems just to buy a few weeks of temporary peace. But that version of me was gone. The woman sitting at this table knew the truth. I looked at Liam. If I do not send this money, what is their next move? Liam folded his hands on the table. Based on the psychological profile we are observing, they will escalate. Narcissists do not handle rejection well, especially when they are backed into a financial corner. When you ignore this demand, they will change tactics. They will likely attempt to destroy your reputation to force your compliance. They will paint themselves as the tragic victims of a natural disaster and cast you as the villain who stole their only escape vehicle. Let them try, I said softly. Constance smiled. It was a terrifying, brilliant expression. You are not going to send him a single dime, she instructed. You are going to let them stew in their ruined, moldy house. You are going to let the financial panic set in. I deleted the voicemail. The action felt incredibly satisfying, a digital severing of their control over my life. I looked at my grandmother and her ruthless attorney. I will not send the money, I agreed. But we need to be ready for the fallout. Brittany and my mother will not take this quietly. They live for public sympathy. They will take this to social media. They will try to turn the entire extended family and our community against me. Liam opened a fresh file folder on the table. That is exactly what we want them to do, he said. We want them to commit to a public lie. We want them to document their false narrative for the entire world to see. Because the louder they scream about your betrayal, the harder they will fall when we present the truth. I felt a cold thrill run down my spine. The storm outside had passed, but the real hurricane was just beginning. I was safe. I was armed with the truth, and I was backed by two of the most formidable people I had ever met. My parents thought they could demand $50,000 as a penalty for my survival. They were about to learn that their survival was going to cost them everything they had. I did not respond to my father's voicemail. I did not text him back. I did not attempt to defend myself or explain that my truck was safely parked in my grandmother's fortified garage. I simply let the silence hang there heavy and deliberate. Liam was right. Silence was the most infuriating response I could offer. Narcissists feed on engagement, whether it is an apology, an argument, or a defense. By giving them nothing, I was starving them of the attention they craved. It took exactly 4 hours for them to escalate. I was sitting in Constance's private library, surrounded by dark wood paneling and thousands of leather-bound books, when my phone vibrated. Then it vibrated again, and again. A continuous, relentless buzz that rattled against the glass surface of the coffee table. I unlocked the screen and opened my Messages app. Dozens of texts were pouring in a sudden avalanche of outrage from numbers I had not interacted with in years. Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, sent the first message. Avery, I cannot believe what I am reading. How could you do that to your own family? You left them to drown. You are a monster. Then came a text from my cousin Mark. You stole their car during a hurricane. Are you insane? Aunt Barbara is in hysterics. The messages kept coming, escalating in their hostility. The notifications were not just texts. My social media apps were exploding. I opened Facebook and immediately saw the source of the chaos. My mother had posted a highly curated multi-paragraph status update. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. The post began with a photograph of their flooded lower garage. The water had receded slightly, leaving a thick layer of corrosive mud covering the floors. Brittany's luxury coupe and my parents' sedans were clearly visible, caked in slime, the expensive interiors completely ruined. The text below the photo was pure venom, disguised as maternal heartbreak. I never thought I would have to write something like this, Barbara had typed. Gregory and I are completely devastated. As many of you know, our home sustained catastrophic damage during the hurricane. The storm surge destroyed our entire first floor and all of our vehicles. But the property damage is not what breaks my heart. I read on my blood running cold as I saw the lie unfold. When the evacuation orders came down, we were trying to secure the house. Our daughter Avery arrived in her heavy-duty SUV. We thought she came to help. Instead, in a fit of inexplicable rage, she demanded we hand over our cash and valuables. When we refused, she stole our only viable evacuation vehicle and drove away right as the storm hit. She left her own sister, her father, and me stranded with no way to escape the rising water. We had to ride out the hurricane, trapped on the second floor, praying the structure would hold. We lost everything in the garage, but we are alive. We are sharing this because we are starting a GoFundMe to cover the emergency repairs and the replacement of our vehicles, since the insurance will not cover the flood damage. Please, if you can help, any donation will allow us to start rebuilding our lives after this horrific betrayal. Below the text was a link to a GoFundMe page titled, "Help the Sterling Family Rebuild After Hurricane Betrayal." The post already had hundreds of shares and thousands of comments. The community people I had known since childhood, former teachers, neighbors, and extended family members, were entirely consuming the narrative. They were offering prayers, expressing shock, and condemning me in the strongest terms possible. I scrolled through the comments, watching my reputation being systematically dismantled. She always was the difficult one. I feel so sorry for Barbara and Gregory. I cannot believe she stole their car. She should be arrested for attempted murder. Someone needs to find her and make her pay for the damage. I felt a sickening knot form in my stomach. The lie was so audacious, so completely detached from reality that it was actually working. They had flipped the script perfectly. They were not the wealthy, entitled parents who had locked their daughter outside in a deadly storm. They were the tragic victims of a greedy, psychotic child who had left them to die. My phone vibrated again. This time, it was an email notification. The subject line made my heart stop for a fraction of a second. It was from the managing director of the consulting firm where I worked as a senior data privacy analyst. Avery, we need to schedule an emergency meeting immediately. Several clients have forwarded a highly disturbing social media post regarding your actions during the hurricane. We are placing you on temporary administrative leave, pending a formal investigation into these allegations. The reality of the smear campaign hit me with full force. This was not just family drama anymore. This was a targeted attack on my livelihood. Barbara and Brittany were not just trying to extort $50,000 from me. They were actively trying to destroy my career, my reputation, and my ability to support myself. They wanted to strip away everything I had built independently, so I would have no choice but to crawl back to them broken and compliant. I set the phone down on the table, my hands shaking slightly. I took a deep breath, forcing the panic down. I had to remain objective. I was a data analyst. I dealt in facts and digital footprints and in undeniable proof. The door to the library opened. Constance walked in, followed closely by Liam. They both registered the expression on my face immediately. They launched the campaign. Constance said, her tone flat and serious. I nodded, pushing the phone toward them. They are claiming I stole their evacuation vehicle and left them to die. They started a GoFundMe for the repairs, and they are spreading the post through my professional network. My firm just placed me on administrative leave. Liam picked up the phone, his eyes scanning the Facebook post and the email from my employer. He did not look surprised. He looked engaged, like a chess player examining the board after his opponent made a highly aggressive but ultimately fatal move. "This is excellent," Liam said, setting the phone back down. I stared at him, incredulous. "Excellent. My entire career is currently imploding based on a viral lie." Liam leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. "It is excellent because they have committed to a specific, highly actionable narrative. They have publicly accused you of grand theft, auto reckless endangerment, and elder abuse. They have tied these false accusations directly to a financial solicitation through the GoFundMe campaign. That crosses the line from simple defamation into wire fraud and malicious prosecution. Constance took a seat opposite me, her gaze steady and focused. You are experiencing the isolation phase, Avery. They want you to feel completely cut off from your support systems. They want you to panic and react emotionally. Do not give them that satisfaction. But I started the anxiety threatening to breach my control. If I lose my job— You will not lose your job, Constance interrupted sharply, because you are going to provide them with indisputable evidence that your parents are committing a federal crime. Liam opened his laptop. We need to secure the counter evidence immediately. I need you to walk me through exactly what happened on that porch. Every detail, every movement. Do not leave anything out. I took another deep breath, grounding myself in the present. I closed my eyes and went back to that freezing, violent moment. I told Liam about the argument in the foyer over the handbags. I told him about the text messages demanding I hand over my keys. I told him about walking onto the porch, hearing the deadbolts lock behind me, and seeing my father screaming through the glass. And then I told him about my mother. I described her standing in the warm light, mouthing the words, "Learn some respect," and pressing the button to lower the storm shutters. When I finished, the library was completely silent. Liam was typing furiously on his laptop. Constance was looking at me, an expression of cold fury settling over her features. They lowered the shutters while you were still on the porch. Constance clarified, her voice dangerously quiet. Yes, I confirmed. Liam stopped typing and looked up. The control panel for the storm shutters. Where is it located? It is mounted on the wall in the foyer, right next to the front door. And the front door? Liam pressed, his eyes narrowing. What kind of security hardware is installed on it? It is a smart lock, I said, the realization beginning to form in my mind. A Ring Doorbell Pro system. It has an integrated HD camera that covers the entire porch, the front steps, and the driveway. Liam leaned back in his chair, a slow, terrifying smile spreading across his face. And who installed that system? I did, I said, my voice gaining strength. 2 years ago. They could not figure out how to configure the Wi-Fi network, so they made me do it. Who controls the master account? Liam asked, the trap snapping shut. I looked at Constance, then back to Liam. The fear was completely gone, replaced by a surge of pure, unfiltered adrenaline. I do, I said. I linked the hardware to my personal cloud server because they kept forgetting their passwords. I have full administrative access. Liam closed his laptop with a sharp snap. Pull the footage. Right now. We need the video from 30 minutes before the storm hit. I grabbed my phone, my fingers flying across the screen. I opened the security app and navigated to the cloud storage archive. The power grid had failed during the hurricane, but the camera was hardwired to the backup generator. The footage would be there. I found the file timestamped for the exact window of the confrontation. I tapped download. As the progress bar filled on the screen, I knew the dynamic had permanently shifted. Barbara and Brittany were busy counting the donations on their fraudulent GoFundMe page, basking in the sympathy of a community they were actively deceiving. They thought they had buried me under a mountain of social outrage. They had no idea I was about to drop a nuclear bomb on their entire existence. I stared at the downloading file, a profound sense of vindication warring with the lingering sting of betrayal. It took exactly 3 minutes and 12 seconds for the high-definition Ring doorbell footage to download onto my new phone. I tapped the screen and the video began to play. It was all there. Every horrifying detail preserved in flawless 1080p resolution with crystal-clear audio. The video opened with me stepping onto the expansive mahogany porch, my yellow raincoat instantly battered by the horizontal wind. Then the unmistakable mechanical thud of the deadbolts slamming shut. I watched myself turn around, shock registering on my face, and pound my fists against the reinforced glass. But the most damning part was the audio. The Ring doorbell's external microphone captured the roaring hurricane, but the internal microphone, the one meant to allow homeowners to speak to visitors, caught the dialogue inside the foyer perfectly. I heard my father's muffled but distinct voice through the glass. You want to act like a defiant brat, you can stay out there until you learn your place. Slide the keys through the mail slot or you ride out the storm on the deck. Then my mother stepped into the frame. The camera captured her perfectly coiffed hair, her pristine cashmere sweater, and the cold, triumphant sneer on her face. It recorded her leaning close to the glass, mouthing the words, "Learn some respect." And finally, the undeniable sound of the electronic control panel beeping, followed by the grinding whine of the heavy metal storm shutters descending, effectively sealing me outside. I paused the video right as the shutters hit the deck. I looked up at Constance and Liam. "I have it," I said, my voice steady. "The video, the audio, the timestamps, everything." Liam did not waste a second. "Cast it to the monitor," he instructed, pointing to a large flat-screen television mounted on the far wall of the library. I synced my phone to the screen and hit play. Constance and Liam watched in absolute silence. The visual evidence of my parents' cruelty displayed on a 70-inch screen was staggering. When the video ended, the quiet in the room felt heavy, charged with a dangerous electric energy. Constance turned to me, her pale blue eyes blazing. "They are going to burn," she stated, a chilling promise delivered with absolute certainty. "They thought they could commit murder and walk away clean. They are about to learn what happens when you strike at my blood." Liam was already back at his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "This changes our timeline," he said, not looking up. "We don't need to wait for them to escalate. We have the kill shot. But we cannot deploy it yet. If we release this video now, they will claim it was a moment of panic, a misunderstanding, or a technical malfunction. They will hire crisis PR firms and spin it into oblivion." "So what do we do?" I asked, leaning forward. "We let them dig their own grave," Liam replied, turning his laptop screen toward me. "Look at this." He had pulled up the GoFundMe page my mother had created. The donation counter was climbing rapidly. It was already past $20,000. "Every dollar they accept under false pretenses constitutes wire fraud," Liam explained, his tone clinical and precise. "Every time they share that post across state lines via social media, they are committing a federal offense. We need to let the financial fraud build. We need to let them establish a comprehensive documented pattern of malicious prosecution and defamation." Constance nodded, a predatory smile touching the corners of her mouth. "Give them enough rope and they will gladly hang themselves. But we must be meticulous, Avery. You cannot respond to a single text message. You cannot defend yourself to your colleagues or extended family. You must disappear completely into this estate." "What about my firm?" I asked, the anxiety returning briefly. "They placed me on administrative leave. If I don't respond to the investigation, they will terminate me for cause." "Leave your firm to me," Liam said. "I will contact your managing director personally. I will inform them that you are cooperating with a high-level federal investigation involving wire fraud and that any adverse employment action taken against you based on fraudulent social media posts will result in immediate catastrophic litigation. They will back off and wait." I looked at Liam, truly assessing him for the first time. He was not just a lawyer, he was a tactician. He viewed conflict as a chessboard, and he was already 5 moves ahead of my parents. He possessed the exact kind of ruthless pragmatism I needed right now. "Okay," I agreed, setting my phone face down on the table. "We wait. But what do we do while they spin their lies?" "We audit," Constance declared, leaning back in her chair. "Gregory and Barbara have lived vastly beyond their means for decades. I have always suspected Gregory was skimming from the family business accounts, but I never had the cause or the energy to initiate a full forensic review. They have given me cause." Constance turned to Liam. "I want a complete freeze on all discretionary funds associated with the Sterling name. I want every offshore account, every shell company, and every charitable trust they manage subjected to a deep-dive forensic audit. I want to know exactly how they funded that beachfront monstrosity, and I want to know where every missing dollar went." Liam nodded, his eyes gleaming. "I will bring in the specialized accounting team this afternoon. We will tear their financial history down to the studs." I felt a surge of professional curiosity overriding my personal trauma. "I can help with that," I offered. My background is in data privacy, but I spent 3 years working in forensic data recovery for a cybersecurity firm. I know how to track digital footprints through nested accounts and encrypted servers. I know how to find the money. Constance looked at me, her expression softening into something resembling pride. Then you will work with Liam, she instructed. Consider this your initiation, Avery. You are no longer the quiet girl sitting on the sidelines. You are a sterling, and it is time you learned how to wage war. For the next 2 weeks, the sprawling library of Constance's estate became our war room. Liam and I worked side by side analyzing thousands of pages of financial documents, bank statements, and tax returns. The sheer volume of data was overwhelming, but I found solace in the methodical, logical process. Numbers did not lie. Data did not gaslight you. While my mother and sister continued to parade their manufactured grief on social media, appearing on local news segments, to tearfully beg for donations to replace their stolen vehicles, I was tracking the movement of millions of dollars through a labyrinth of fraudulent shell companies. The deeper we dug, the more horrifying the reality became. Gregory and Preston had not just been skimming profits. They had been systematically embezzling from Constance's most prized charitable foundation, a fund dedicated to pediatric cancer research. They had forged invoices, created phantom vendors, and funneled millions into offshore accounts to pay for luxury cars, designer wardrobes, and unapproved renovations to the beachfront estate. Look at this, I said one evening, pointing to a highlighted row on a spreadsheet. Liam leaned over my shoulder, his proximity a familiar comfort after weeks of intense collaboration. They authorized a $500,000 grant to a medical supply company in the Cayman Islands. I explained, tracing the data path on my monitor. But the company was incorporated 3 days before the grant was approved, and the registered agent is a law firm that specializes in asset protection for high-net-worth individuals. Liam squinted at the screen, his jaw tight. Cross-referenced the incorporation date with Gregory's property records. I pulled up a separate database and ran the query. The results were instantaneous. The Cayman Company was incorporated on the exact same day Gregory purchased the custom yacht docked at the marina. Liam let out a low whistle. It's not just embezzlement, Avery. It's blatant, arrogant money laundering. They didn't even try to hide the paper trail. They just assumed Constance would never look. They assumed she was too old to care, and that I was too weak to challenge them. I said, printing the documentation and adding it to the growing mountain of evidence stacked on the conference table. As we compiled the financial kill shot, the social pressure outside our fortified sanctuary continued to mount. The GoFundMe campaign had surpassed $80,000. My mother's tearful local news interview had gone viral, prompting an outpouring of community outrage directed entirely at me. My phone, which I checked only once a day under Liam's strict supervision, was a wasteland of hateful voicemails and toxic messages. The isolation was brutal, but I drew strength from the undeniable truth sitting in our evidence boxes. Every hateful comment was another brick in the prison cell my parents were building for themselves. Every fraudulent donation they accepted was another federal charge Liam would add to the indictment. Then on a Tuesday morning, exactly 3 weeks after the hurricane, the dynamic abruptly shifted. Constance walked into the library, her expression grim. "They are panicking," she announced, dropping a thick legal envelope onto the table. "The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings on their beachfront property yesterday due to non-payment of the mortgage. Gregory attempted to access the emergency family trust to cover the arrears. And he found it frozen," Liam stated, a satisfied smirk touching his lips. "He found it completely locked down," Constance confirmed, "and he is not taking it well. Security just notified me that Gregory and Barbara have breached the outer gate. They are currently driving up the main access road." My heart hammered against my ribs. "They are coming here." Constance nodded, her pale blue eyes locking onto mine. "They have realized that their cash flow has been severed. They are coming to demand answers, and they will use every manipulative tactic in their arsenal to get what they want." Liam stood up, closing his laptop. "Do we engage?" he asked Constance. "We engage," Constance decided, smoothing the lapels of her pristine suit. "We let them spin their lies in person. We let them trap themselves." She turned to me, her voice sharp and commanding. "Are you ready for this, Avery?" I looked at the mountain of financial evidence, the downloaded Ring doorbell footage secured on an encrypted hard drive, and the ruthless corporate attorney standing beside me. I thought about the freezing ocean water rising to my chest and the terrifying darkness of the locked porch. I was not the same woman they had abandoned in the storm. "I am ready," I said, my voice cold and steady. "Let them in." The massive oak doors of the library swung open. Two armed security guards stood aside, allowing my parents to step into the room. The transformation they had undergone since the hurricane was truly a masterclass in theatrical deception. My mother Barbara wore a wrinkled beige cardigan and slacks, a stark contrast to her usual designer wardrobe. She had purposely applied minimal makeup to look pale and exhausted. My father Gregory carried his shoulders slumped, his face unshaven, projecting the image of a man broken by grief and disaster. They stopped just inside the threshold. Barbara let out a sharp, perfectly rehearsed gasp as her eyes locked onto me. She pressed both hands to her mouth, her shoulders trembling with manufactured relief. "Avery!" She cried out, her voice thick with fake tears. She rushed forward, arms extended, playing the role of a desperate mother, reunited with her lost child. "Oh my God, Avery, you are alive! We have been out of our minds with worry." I did not move. I remained seated next to Liam, my posture rigid, my expression completely blank. When Barbara reached the table and realized I was not going to stand up and embrace her, she awkwardly dropped her hands. She settled for gripping the edge of the mahogany table, looking from me to Constance with wide, pleading eyes. "Mother," Gregory said, stepping up beside his wife. He directed his gaze entirely at Constance, recognizing immediately who held the real power in the room. He completely ignored Liam. "Thank God she is here. Thank God you found her. We thought we had lost her to the storm. The police and the Coast Guard have been completely useless. We have been searching for days." Constance remained seated at the head of the table. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her coffee. The silence stretched uncomfortable and heavy. She did not offer them a seat. She did not offer them comfort. "You have been searching for days," Constance repeated. Her tone was mild, but the underlying danger was palpable. "That is fascinating, Gregory, because I had my security team monitor the local emergency dispatch logs. I also checked with the county sheriff. There is no record of you filing a missing persons report for your daughter." Gregory did not miss a beat. He smoothly shifted his stance, placing a comforting hand on Barbara's back. "The emergency lines were completely overwhelmed, Mother. The entire county was in chaos. We drove around the mainland for hours, searching the evacuation shelters ourselves. We were paralyzed with fear." Barbara nodded frantically, producing a tissue from her pocket to dab at her dry eyes. "It was the most horrific night of our lives. We thought she was dead, and then when we finally got cell service, people started sending us terrible messages based on a misunderstanding. It has been a nightmare." "A misunderstanding," I said. My voice was calm and steady, betraying none of the adrenaline surging through my veins. "Is that what you call telling the entire world I stole your car and left you to die?" Barbara turned to me, her face twisting into a mask of maternal pity. "Avery, sweetheart, you have to understand our perspective. You were so hysterical that day. You were not in your right mind." I looked at Liam. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. "Give them the rope. Let them hang themselves." "I was hysterical," I prompted, leaning back in my chair. "Please, Mom, tell Constance exactly what happened. Tell her why I was outside." Barbara seized the opportunity, turning back to Constance to deliver her carefully constructed narrative. She clasped her hands together, playing the role of the patient, long-suffering parent. "Mother, you know how Avery can get." Barbara began, her voice dripping with condescension. "She has always struggled to manage her emotions. She arrived at the house already angry and combative. We were simply trying to organize a safe evacuation plan for the whole family. Brittany was trying to pack and Avery just snapped. She started screaming at us completely unprovoked. Gregory stepped in to reinforce the lie. We tried to calm her down, but she became completely irrational. She demanded we hand over our cash. When we told her to calm down, she grabbed her keys and stormed out the front doors. We tried to stop her, but she was moving too fast. And the storm shutters. Constance asked, her voice dangerously quiet. How did they close while she was on the porch? Barbara let out a tragic sigh, shaking her head. It was a mechanical malfunction. The storm surge must have shorted the electrical grid early. The shutters just dropped on their own. We tried to open them. Gregory pounded on the control panel, but the system was completely dead. By the time we managed to pry the side door open, Avery had already run away into the storm. We thought she had driven off. She took her truck and abandoned us, Gregory added, his voice hardening slightly. We were trapped inside with the water rising. We had to break into the second floor to survive. We only started that online fundraiser because her selfish actions left us completely destitute. We needed to repair the house to give her a safe place to return to. I stared at them, marveling at the sheer audacity of the lie. They had rehearsed this. They had synchronized their stories, matching their fabricated timeline to the power outages. They honestly believed they had outsmarted us. They believed there was no evidence to contradict their narrative, and they were banking entirely on Constance viewing me as an unreliable emotional mess. You needed the fundraiser money to give me a safe place to return to, I repeated, making sure my tone was loud enough for Liam to catch on his recording device. So the $50,000 you demanded in your voicemail was for my benefit? Gregory's jaw tightened. He realized he had overstepped, but his arrogance pushed him forward. We have significant expenses, Avery. The storm ruined everything on the ground floor. Which brings me to another point, Mother. He turned back to Constance, shifting his focus to his primary objective. The real reason they had braved a visit to the inland estate was not to find me. It was to secure their cash flow. Mother, we encountered a strange error at the bank yesterday, Gregory said, trying to sound casual, though the desperation was clearly bleeding through his facade. We attempted to access the emergency family trust to pay the disaster cleanup crews. The bank manager informed me the accounts are temporarily frozen. There must be some mistake with the routing numbers. Constance picked up her coffee cup and took another slow sip. She let the silence stretch for a long, agonizing moment. She looked at Gregory, then at Barbara, examining them as if they were specimens under a microscope. There is no mistake with the routing numbers, Gregory, Constance said. Her voice was no longer mild. It was pure, sharpened steel. I froze the accounts. Gregory's face fell. The carefully constructed mask of the grieving father completely evaporated, replaced by genuine panic. You froze the accounts. Why? We are in the middle of a disaster recovery. Our home is destroyed. We need those funds immediately. You will not see another dime of my money, Constance stated, placing her cup back onto the saucer with a sharp clink. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Barbara took a step forward, dropping the tearful mother act entirely. Constance, you cannot be serious. We are your family, your daughter and son-in-law. We nearly died in that storm. You cannot punish us because Avery is spinning some hysterical lie to cover up her own terrible behavior. Avery has not spun a single lie, Constance replied, her gaze boring into Barbara. Avery has not needed to say much at all. Your actions over the past 3 days have spoken volumes. You created a fraudulent public campaign to extort money from our community. You defamed my granddaughter. And now you stand in my library and attempt to insult my intelligence with a pathetic story about a mechanical malfunction. It is the truth, Gregory shouted, slamming his hand against the mahogany table. The system shorted out. You are taking the word of a deeply unstable girl over your own son. Liam stood up. His movement was smooth, but it carried an undeniable physical threat that made Gregory instantly step back. Liam did not raise his voice. He spoke with the quiet, lethal authority of a man who held all the cards. The Ring doorbell camera system on your porch is hardwired to your home backup generator, Liam stated calmly. It does not rely on the local electrical grid. It records in high-definition video and audio, and it automatically uploads that data to a secure cloud server, a server that Avery controls. The blood completely drained from Barbara's face. She stumbled backward, bumping into Gregory. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. We know exactly what happened on that porch, Liam continued, taking a step toward them. We know you locked the deadbolts manually. We know what you said to her through the glass. And we know exactly who pushed the button to lower those shutters. We have it all documented, timestamped, and preserved for a federal investigation. Gregory looked at me, sheer terror finally breaking through his arrogant exterior. He realized the trap had closed around them. They had just spent the last 10 minutes loudly documenting a fabricated story in front of Constance and her lead corporate attorney. They had just handed us evidence of their intent to commit fraud. Avery, Gregory stammered, his voice suddenly weak. You have to understand. The stress, the panic of the storm. We were not thinking clearly. You told me to learn some respect, I said, rising from my chair. I walked around the table until I was standing just a few feet away from them. I did not feel small anymore. I did not feel like the scapegoat. I felt powerful. You told me to slide the keys through the mail slot or drown. That was not panic, Dad. That was a choice. Please, Barbara whispered, reaching a trembling hand out toward me. Avery, we are your parents. We love you. We can fix this. I looked at her extended hand, feeling nothing but cold disgust. You do not love me. You love control. You love Constance money. And you just lost both. Constance stood up at the head of the table. Her presence dominated the room. You are done here, she announced, her voice ringing with absolute finality. You will leave my property immediately. If you attempt to contact Avery again, if you step foot near these gates, my security team will detain you for trespassing. Mother, you cannot do this, Gregory begged, his voice cracking. We have no cars. The house is unlivable. We have no access to cash. What are we supposed to do? I suggest you learn to survive, Constance said coldly. Just as you expected Avery to do on your porch. Security, escort them out. The two armed guards stepped forward, grabbing Gregory and Barbara by their arms. My parents did not fight back. They were completely broken, paralyzed by the realization that their safety net was gone. As the guards dragged them toward the heavy oak doors, Barbara looked back at me one last time. Her face was twisted in a mixture of hatred and absolute despair. I did not blink. I watched the doors swing shut behind them, sealing them outside. The click of the heavy latch locking into place was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. They will not accept this, Liam said, turning back to the table and opening his laptop. Cornered animals always strike back. Gregory will realize that the only way to access the money is to remove Constance from the equation. Constance sat back down, smoothing her suit jacket. Let him try, she said fiercely. He thinks I am an old woman who can be easily bullied. He is about to find out exactly how I built this empire. Liam, prepare the legal team. Avery, continue the forensic audit. The war has officially begun. I looked at the closed doors, then back to the mountain of financial documents waiting on the table. My parents thought they could destroy my life with a hurricane and a Facebook post. They had no idea they had just declared war on a tempest they could not survive. The morning after my parents were thrown off the estate, the atmosphere in the library shifted from quiet investigation to an active war room. I was sitting beside Liam, tracing a series of offshore wire transfers, when the heavy oak doors opened. It was not Constance this time. It was the head of estate security holding a thick manila envelope. His expression was grim as he walked directly to the head of the table where my grandmother was reviewing a stack of property deeds. A process server had just arrived at the outer security gate, accompanied by local law enforcement. They were demanding to serve Constance personally. Constance did not flinch. She simply instructed the security chief to bring the documents inside and send the local police away. When the envelope was placed on the mahogany table, Liam immediately took possession of it. He sliced it open with a silver letter opener, his dark eyes scanning the first page of the dense legal filing. I watched his jaw clench. The relaxed, confident demeanor he had carried for the past 3 days instantly vanished, replaced by a rigid, terrifying focus. He slid the document across the table toward Constance, but his eyes locked onto mine. Gregory and Preston had not wasted a single minute after being escorted off the property. They had escalated straight to the legal nuclear option. It was an emergency ex parte petition for a temporary conservatorship filed in the county probate court at 8 o'clock that morning. Liam began to read the allegations aloud, his voice steady but laced with absolute disgust. According to the sworn affidavit submitted by my father and my golden child brother Constance, was suffering from rapid onset dementia. They claimed her mental faculties had severely deteriorated over the past 6 months, rendering her entirely incapable of managing her own finances or making rational decisions. But they did not stop at attacking her cognitive health. They needed a villain to explain why she had frozen their access to the family trust, and they had chosen me. The petition accused me of gross elder abuse. Gregory and Preston claimed under penalty of perjury that I had maliciously manipulated a vulnerable senior citizen. They stated that after abandoning my family during a devastating hurricane, I had fled to my grandmother's estate to isolate her from her loving children. Their narrative painted me as a financially desperate, unstable predator who had brainwashed an 82-year-old woman into cutting off her rightful heirs. They told the court I was attempting to hijack a $2 billion empire to fund my own selfish lifestyle. I felt the blood drain from my face. The sheer magnitude of their lie was breathtaking. They were weaponizing the legal system to strip away my grandmother's autonomy and destroy my reputation in a single calculated strike. They had hired an unethical concierge doctor who had never even met Constance to sign a sworn medical declaration supporting their fabricated claims. The doctor cited erratic behavior, sudden paranoia, and an irrational hostility toward her devoted son and grandson as definitive proof of cognitive collapse. But the worst part was the final page of the document. Liam tapped the judge's signature at the bottom of the order. Because Gregory and Preston had filed the petition as an emergency ex parte motion, claiming Constance was in immediate danger of financial ruin at my hands, the judge had granted a temporary order without holding a hearing. The court had officially frozen all of Constance's primary operating accounts, her personal trusts, and her liquid asset portfolios. The judge had appointed Gregory as the temporary conservator of the estate, granting him total legal authority over Constance's money until a formal hearing could be held in 10 days. They had effectively cut off her financial oxygen. My father and brother had used the court system to achieve exactly what they had tried to do to me during the hurricane. They had locked us out. With the stroke of a judge's pen, Constance was legally barred from accessing her own immense wealth. Gregory now held the keys to the castle, and he had done it under the guise of being a protective, loving son, saving his mother from a predatory granddaughter. Panic, cold and sharp, flared in my chest. I looked at Constance. This woman had spent her entire life building an untouchable empire, and my presence had just provided my father with the ammunition he needed to temporarily strip it all away. I expected her to be furious with me. I expected her to demand I leave the property to save her reputation. I braced myself for the rejection I had been conditioned to expect my entire life. Instead, Constance picked up the petition and read it herself. She did not tremble. She did not display an ounce of fear. She read the vicious lies crafted by her own son and grandson with the detached fascination of a general studying an enemy battle plan. Preston was the real surprise in this legal maneuver. My brother had always been the quiet beneficiary of my parents' favoritism. While Brittany demanded the spotlight, Preston simply existed in a state of absolute entitlement, his Ivy League education and luxury condo fully funded by the money Gregory was siphoning from the family trusts. Preston had never lifted a finger to build anything of his own, preferring to wait patiently for his massive inheritance. Now, seeing that inheritance threatened, he had willingly signed his name to a fraudulent court document, cementing his role in this conspiracy. He was just as ruthless as my father, but infinitely more cowardly, hiding behind the guise of a concerned grandson. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I looked at the files scattered across the table. They froze everything I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Your accounts, the trusts. They have legal control. Liam closed the file folder, his dark eyes meeting mine. It is a temporary freeze, Avery. It is a standard protective measure granted in ex parte hearings when elder financial abuse is alleged. The judge erred on the side of caution based on the fraudulent medical affidavit. But a temporary order is not a permanent ruling. But they have the power right now. I argued the injustice of it, making my hands shake. They can access your money, Constance. They can pay their emergency contractors for the beach house. They can fund their criminal defense. They used me to trap you. Constance finally looked up from the document. She placed it gently on the table and folded her hands. The temperature in the library seemed to drop 10 degrees. They have not trapped me, Avery, Constance said, her voice smooth and terrifyingly calm. They have simply handed me the rope I need to hang them. Gregory and Preston just committed perjury in a federal court filing. They just submitted a fraudulent medical evaluation to a sitting judge. They have escalated from simple embezzlement to a massive coordinated conspiracy to defraud a multi-billion-dollar estate. I stared at her, trying to comprehend her absolute lack of fear. But your money is frozen. The judge gave Gregory control of the assets. Liam let out a sharp, genuine laugh. It was a harsh sound that cut through the tension in the room. Avery, do you really think a woman who built a $2 billion global enterprise from scratch keeps all her operating capital in accounts her son knows about? Constance smiled, a predatory gleam in her pale blue eyes. Gregory froze the accounts he was aware of. He froze the visible trusts. He froze the domestic portfolios. He has temporarily inconvenienced my accountants. He has not touched my war chest. Liam leaned forward, resting his forearms on the heavy mahogany table. The probate judge scheduled the formal hearing for 10 days from today. In 10 days, Gregory and Preston will walk into that courtroom expecting an easy victory. They expect us to be scrambling, fighting defensively to prove Constance is competent. They expect you to be cowed into submission by the threat of criminal elder abuse charges. They want me to disappear, I stated, the realization solidifying in my mind. They filed this petition to scare me away. They think if they threaten me with a criminal investigation, I will run back to my apartment and stay quiet. Exactly, Liam confirmed. It is an intimidation tactic dressed up as a legal proceeding, but it is a massive, fatal overreach. By filing this petition, Gregory has opened the door to full legal discovery. He has invited the court to examine the financial history of this estate to determine if abuse has occurred. Liam pointed a finger at the mountain of spreadsheets and bank records we had been analyzing for the past 3 weeks. He just gave us the legal mandate we need to present every single piece of evidence we have gathered. He wants the judge to look at the money. We are going to show the judge exactly where the money went. Constance stood up, smoothing the front of her jacket. She walked over to the massive window overlooking the expansive grounds of her estate. Gregory has always been predictable, she said softly, staring out at the manicured lawns. He acts out of greed, and he assumes everyone else operates with his exact level of mediocrity. He truly believes he has cornered us. She turned back to face me, her expression resolute. We have 10 days, Avery. 10 days to trace every stolen dollar. 10 days to map every offshore shell company Gregory and Preston created. We will not walk into that courtroom to defend my mental capacity. We will walk into that courtroom to completely annihilate them. I looked at the fraudulent legal petition resting on the table. My father and brother had tried to brand me as a criminal. They had tried to strip my grandmother of her dignity and her autonomy just to secure their lavish lifestyle. The fear that had briefly gripped me evaporated entirely, replaced by a cold, calculating determination. They wanted a war over the family legacy, and they were about to get one. I pulled my laptop closer, opening the encrypted database holding the financial records. The hurricane had physically locked me out, but this legal threat was an attempt to erase my existence entirely. 10 days, I said, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Let us finish the audit. Let us show the judge who the real predators are. The probate court mandate to examine Constance and her financial fitness swung like a double-edged sword. Gregory and Preston had filed their emergency petition, assuming the legal spotlight would shine exclusively on my grandmother's cognitive health and my alleged manipulation. They never anticipated that Liam would instantly weaponize the discovery phase. By formally requesting an emergency conservatorship over Constance's entire estate, my father had legally invited the court to scrutinize every single ledger transfer and withdrawal associated with the family trusts. Liam did not just comply with the discovery request. He flooded the zone, issuing sweeping subpoenas for the last 7 years of banking records across every entity Gregory and Preston had ever touched. The library of Constance's estate transformed into a high-tech forensic laboratory. I brought in an array of massive high-resolution monitors, linking them directly to the encrypted cloud servers where Constance's holding companies stored their raw data. While Liam handled the aggressive legal maneuvering, drowning my parents' attorneys in procedural filings to keep them distracted, I went to work on the numbers. I was a data privacy consultant by trade, trained to spot anomalies, encrypted backdoors, and digital fingerprints that people desperately tried to hide. Gregory thought he had covered his tracks by utilizing layers of corporate bureaucracy. He did not realize his daughter knew exactly how to dismantle his digital labyrinth. I started with the primary family trust, the one Gregory had been complaining about when the bank froze his access. The surface-level accounting looked meticulously clean, almost too perfect. Every expense was categorized under vague but plausible headings like estate management, property maintenance, and administrative overhead. But when I cross-referenced the outgoing wire transfers against the actual invoices submitted to the accounting department, the facade immediately began to crack. The amounts did not match the market rates for the services rendered. They were hyperinflated, designed to bleed capital slowly enough to avoid triggering automatic fraud alerts. I isolated a repeating vendor that appeared consistently over the past 5 years. The company was listed as Apex Global Consulting. According to the internal ledgers, Apex had been billing Constance's primary trust an average of $80,000 a month for strategic investment advisement. I pulled the corporate registration for Apex and ran the tax identification numbers through a forensic database. The company had no physical office, no public-facing website, and 0 listed employees. It was a ghost entity, a hollow shell constructed entirely out of legal paperwork and a registered agent in the Cayman Islands. I called Liam over to my workstation, pointing at the glowing screen. "Look at the routing numbers for these Apex payments," I said, my voice tight with adrenaline. "The money leaves Constance's domestic accounts and routes through a clearinghouse in Delaware before landing in a Cayman Islands corporate account. It sits there for exactly 48 hours before being dispersed into 3 separate limited liability companies." Liam leaned over my shoulder, his eyes scanning the data pathways I had mapped out on the monitors. "Can you trace the ultimate beneficiaries of those 3 limited liability companies?" he asked, his tone razor sharp. I tapped my keyboard, executing a deep search protocol I had designed for uncovering hidden corporate ownership. It took the system nearly 10 minutes to pierce the international privacy shields, but when the results finally populated on the screen, the truth was undeniable. The first company was registered to my father. The second company was registered to my mother. The third company was registered to Preston. "They are not just skimming off the top," I told Liam, a profound sense of disgust washing over me. "They have been running a highly sophisticated international money laundering operation. They are funneling Constance's capital out of the country, washing it through fake consulting fees, and dumping it straight into their own pockets." Liam pulled up a chair beside me, his legal mind immediately calculating the criminal exposure. "Pull the dates on the largest disbursements," he instructed. "I want to see exactly what they were buying with stolen money." I sorted the database by transaction size and matched the dates against public property records and my own memory of my family's lavish acquisitions. The correlations were sickeningly precise. A wire transfer for $400,000 matched the exact week Gregory purchased his custom luxury yacht. A disbursement for $200,000 aligned perfectly with the month Brittany received her fleet of luxury sports cars. The largest single transfer, a staggering $2 million, was initiated just days before my parents signed the contract for the massive ground-floor entertainment wing of their beachfront mansion, the very same wing the ocean had just destroyed. But the absolute worst discovery was yet to come. As I dug deeper into the origin of the funds, tracing the money backward from the Delaware clearinghouse to its original source within Constance's empire, my blood ran cold. The money was not coming from the family's general operating trust. It was not coming from Constance's private investment portfolios. "Liam," I whispered, staring at the screen in absolute horror. "The money is coming from the Pediatric Oncology Foundation." Liam froze. He looked at the monitor, his jaw clenching so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. He reached out and scrolled through the origin accounts, verifying the routing numbers against his own legal files. It was true. Constance had established a massive charitable trust dedicated entirely to funding experimental cancer treatments for terminally ill children. Because the foundation processed millions of dollars in legitimate grants every quarter, Gregory had used it as his personal piggy bank, hiding his fraudulent Apex invoices among the hundreds of legitimate medical research disbursements. "He is stealing from dying children," Liam said, his voice dropping to a terrifying lethal register. "He is buying yachts and sports cars with money meant for pediatric cancer wards." "And he is not doing it alone," I added, bringing up the digital signature logs attached to the offshore transfers. "Gregory might be greedy, but he is not technically proficient enough to build a Cayman Islands shell network. Look at the authorization codes on the wire transfers. Every single offshore transfer, every fake invoice, and every encrypted routing protocol carried the exact same digital fingerprint. The network had been designed, implemented, and managed by Preston. My golden child brother, with his prestigious Ivy League business degree, was the architect of the entire operation. While Gregory played the wealthy patriarch at the country club, Preston was sitting in his luxury condo, actively laundering stolen charity funds through international tax havens. They had weaponized Constance's generosity to fund their superficial narcissistic lives. They had bought their designer clothes, their beachfront renovations, and their perfect family image with blood money. And now they had the sheer unparalleled audacity to walk into a probate court and accuse me of elder financial abuse. The heavy oak doors of the library swung open and Constance walked in. She was dressed impeccably, carrying a silver tray with 3 glasses of iced water. She set the tray down on the conference table and looked at our faces. She did not need to ask if we had found something. Our expressions communicated the severity of the discovery perfectly. "Tell me," Constance demanded, taking her seat at the head of the table. Liam stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. His demeanor was completely transformed. He was no longer just a corporate attorney preparing for a civil dispute. He was a prosecutor armed with a lethal indictment. He walked Constance through the entire scheme, from the fake Apex invoices to the Cayman Islands routing numbers, and finally to the ultimate beneficiaries of the stolen funds. When Liam revealed that the money had been siphoned directly from the Pediatric Oncology Foundation, Constance did not gasp. She did not cry. She sat perfectly still, her hands resting flat on the mahogany table. The temperature in the room plummeted. I watched the last remaining traces of maternal affection vanish from my grandmother's eyes, replaced by a cold, absolute void. "My son is a thief," Constance stated, her voice devoid of any emotion. "And my grandson is his accomplice. They have desecrated a foundation built to save children's lives so they could purchase coastal real estate and luxury vehicles. We have all the proof," I told her, sliding a thick binder of printed financial logs across the table. "It is undeniable. The digital footprints lead directly to their personal accounts. We have the exact dates, the exact amounts, and the exact IP addresses Preston used to authorize the transfers. The total amount embezzled over the past 5 years is just over $12 million. Constance placed her hand flat on top of the binder. She did not open it. She simply stared at the cover, absorbing the magnitude of the betrayal. "They filed a petition to declare me mentally incompetent," she said softly. "They wanted to lock me in a facility and take total control of the estate before I ever thought to look at the foundation's ledgers. They thought this conservatorship would be their final, ultimate victory." Liam leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Constance. "The probate hearing is in exactly 4 days. Gregory and Preston will walk into that courtroom expecting us to play defense. They expect us to argue about medical evaluations and family dynamics. We will not argue," Constance commanded, rising from her chair. Her presence was terrifyingly magnificent. "We will let them present their fraudulent medical experts. We will let them swear under oath that they are simply concerned, loving relatives trying to protect their vulnerable matriarch. We will let them dig their graves as deep as they possibly can." And then Constance looked at me, a fierce, proud fire burning in her pale blue eyes. "Then, Avery, you will take the stand. You will present the video of their cruelty on the porch. And when the judge is suitably horrified by their absolute lack of humanity, Liam will present this binder. We will not just defeat their petition. We will hand the federal authorities everything they need to bury my son and grandson in a federal penitentiary for the rest of their natural lives. I looked at the mountain of evidence we had compiled. The fear and isolation I had felt during the hurricane felt like a lifetime ago. My family had tried to destroy me to protect their perfect, wealthy facade. They had locked me out in the dark, believing I would simply wash away. They were about to learn that they had not just locked me out. They had locked themselves in a cage of their own making, and I was holding the key. The courtroom trap was set, and it was going to be an absolute bloodbath. The heavy mahogany doors of the county probate court loomed at the end of the long marble corridor. Today was the 10th day. The day my father Gregory and my brother Preston believed they would legally cement their control over Constance and her $2 billion empire. I walked down the hall, flanked by Liam and Constance. We moved as a single, impenetrable unit. Constance wore a sharply tailored navy blue suit, her posture impeccable, exuding the terrifying calm of a corporate titan preparing for a hostile takeover. Liam carried nothing but a single sleek black leather briefcase. It contained the financial annihilation of my entire family. As we approached the courtroom entrance, the doors swung open and my family spilled out into the hallway. The visual contrast was staggering. Gregory, Barbara, and Preston had completely abandoned their usual displays of aggressive wealth. Gone were the designer watches, the custom-tailored Italian suits, and the conspicuous diamond jewelry. Gregory wore a slightly oversized, off-the-rack gray suit that made his shoulders look slumped and defeated. Barbara wore a modest beige cardigan buttoned to the collar, her face scrubbed entirely clean of makeup to emphasize the dark manufactured circles under her eyes. Preston had styled his hair to look unkempt and frantic. They were putting on a masterclass in theatrical deception. They were playing the roles of exhausted, heartbroken children desperately trying to save their beloved matriarch from ruin. Gregory stopped in the center of the hallway when he saw us. He immediately clasped his hands together in a gesture of profound distress. He looked at Constance with wide, pleading eyes, ignoring me entirely. He was already performing for the bailiffs and the court clerks walking past. Constance did not break her stride. She walked straight past him without a single glance, forcing Gregory to step awkwardly out of her path. Liam and I followed her through the heavy wooden doors and took our seats at the respondent table. The courtroom was vast, lined with dark wood and echoing with the quiet rustle of legal papers. Judge Evelyn Harrison presided over the proceedings. She was a no-nonsense jurist with a reputation for sniffing out familial greed in probate disputes. Gregory and his high-priced legal team sat at the petitioner table. His lead attorney, a slick man named Vance, stood up to deliver the opening statement. Vance painted a tragic, devastating picture. He spoke in hushed, sorrowful tones about a family torn apart by a sudden, severe cognitive decline. He described Constance not as a brilliant business leader, but as a confused, paranoid elderly woman who had lost her grip on reality. Then Vance turned his attention to me. He pointed a finger in my direction and labeled me an opportunistic predator. He told the judge that I had been estranged from the family for a decade, a troubled young woman with a history of erratic behavior. He claimed that when the hurricane struck, I saw a golden opportunity. According to Vance, I abandoned my loving parents during the storm, stole their only means of escape, and fled to my grandmother's estate to isolate her. He claimed I was actively brainwashing a dementia patient to seize control of a multi-billion-dollar fortune. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the table. The sheer magnitude of their lie was breathtaking. They were weaponizing the legal system to strip away my grandmother's autonomy, and they were doing it under the guise of deep, selfless love. I looked at Liam. He was taking slow, deliberate notes on a yellow legal pad, his expression completely blank. He wanted them to feel safe. He wanted them to believe their narrative was working. Judge Harrison called Gregory to the stand first. My father walked slowly to the witness box, his head bowed. When he swore to tell the truth, his voice trembled. It was a spectacular performance. Gregory spent the next 45 minutes weaving a tapestry of pure, unadulterated gaslighting. He testified that Constance had started forgetting names and misplacing important financial documents 6 months ago. He claimed she had developed terrifying bouts of paranoia, suddenly accusing him of stealing, without any basis in reality. Then Gregory turned his focus to the hurricane. He looked directly at the judge and let a single perfect tear slide down his cheek. He testified under oath that I had arrived at their beach house in a hysterical rage. He swore that I demanded cash, and when they tried to calm me down, I stole their heavy-duty truck and left them trapped in a flooded house. He told the court that he had tried to call Constance for help, only to find that I had already intercepted her and poisoned her mind against him. He claimed I was blocking his calls and holding his mother hostage out of pure spite. It breaks my heart. Gregory sobbed, gripping the edges of the witness stand. I just want my mother back. She is not in her right mind, Your Honor. She needs protection from that girl. She needs her family to manage her care before it is too late. I watched him commit felony perjury without a single ounce of hesitation. He was so incredibly confident in his lie because he truly believed he was the smartest person in the room. He believed that tears and a cheap suit would blind the judge to the reality of his greed. He stepped down from the stand looking emotionally exhausted but triumphant. Barbara reached out and squeezed his hand as he returned to the petitioner table. Next, Vance called their star witness to the stand, Dr. Eris Thorne. Dr. Thorne was a highly credentialed concierge physician who catered exclusively to the ultra-wealthy. He wore a sharp suit and carried himself with an air of absolute medical authority. He had been paid an exorbitant consulting fee by Gregory to evaluate Constance. The only problem was that Dr. Thorne had never actually spoken to my grandmother. He had never conducted a neurological exam. He had never drawn blood or reviewed her current medical charts. He had based his entire diagnosis on a brief, highly contentious interaction at the security gate of the inland estate, combined with a mountain of fabricated medical history provided solely by Gregory. Vance walked Dr. Thorne through his impressive resume, establishing him as an expert in geriatric cognitive decline. Then he asked Dr. Thorne to share his professional assessment of Constance's mental fitness. Dr. Thorne leaned into the microphone, his tone clinical and devastatingly persuasive. Based on the comprehensive behavioral history provided by her primary caretakers and my own observational assessment, it is my professional medical opinion that the conservatee is suffering from advanced rapid-onset vascular dementia. The symptoms described by her son represent classic cognitive collapse. The sudden irrational hostility toward trusted family members, the paranoia regarding her finances, and her susceptibility to isolation by an estranged relative are textbook indicators of severe mental deterioration. Vance paced in front of the witness stand, nodding gravely. Doctor, in your expert opinion, is Constance capable of managing her own legal and financial affairs? Absolutely not, Dr. Thorne stated firmly. Leaving a woman in this advanced state of decline in control of a massive financial empire is incredibly dangerous. She lacks the executive function required to make rational decisions. Furthermore, she is highly vulnerable to undue influence. The fact that she has completely isolated herself with a granddaughter who has a documented history of erratic behavior is a massive red flag. The granddaughter is clearly exploiting the patient's paranoia to alienate her from her true support system. An emergency conservatorship is not just legally appropriate in this case. It is a medical necessity to protect the patient from further abuse and severe financial exploitation. The courtroom was dead silent. Dr. Thorne had delivered the exact testimony Gregory paid him to provide. He had wrapped a vicious, self-serving lie in the sterile, authoritative language of a medical diagnosis. He had diagnosed Constance with a degenerative brain disease without ever stepping foot inside her house. I looked at Judge Harrison. She was taking copious notes, her brow furrowed in deep concern. The trap was perfectly set. Gregory and Barbara had successfully painted themselves as the tragic loving heroes of this story. They had painted Constance as a confused, helpless victim, and they had painted me as a ruthless, manipulative predator. The narrative was tight, emotionally compelling, and backed by the testimony of a supposed medical expert. Gregory leaned back in his chair at the petitioner table. He shot a quick, arrogant smirk across the aisle. He thought he had won. He thought the gavel was about to come down, granting him total, unmitigated access to a $2 billion fortune. He thought he was walking out of this courthouse as the undisputed king of the family empire. Liam stopped writing on his yellow legal pad. He clicked his pen shut and placed it neatly next to his briefcase. The relaxed, almost bored expression he had worn throughout Gregory's tearful performance and Dr. Thorne's clinical assassination completely vanished. Liam stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He looked at Dr. Thorne, then at Gregory, and finally at the judge. The moment of their absolute confidence had reached its peak. It was time to initiate the total collapse of their reality. Liam approached the podium, his demeanor terrifyingly calm. He did not immediately address the witness. Instead, he opened his black leather briefcase and withdrew a single thin folder. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Gregory smirked from the petitioner table, clearly believing his high-priced medical expert had just secured the $2 billion empire. Dr. Thorne. Liam began, his voice perfectly modulated. You testified earlier that you have diagnosed my client Constance with advanced, rapid-onset vascular dementia. That is correct, Dr. Thorne replied, adjusting his cuffs with an air of practiced authority. Based on a comprehensive review of the behavioral history and my own observational assessment, the diagnosis is definitive. Fascinating, Liam said, leaning against the podium. Because according to your own billing records, which we subpoenaed during discovery, your observational assessment consisted of exactly one encounter with Constance at the security gate of her inland estate on Tuesday, September 12th. Dr. Thorne shifted slightly in his chair. Observational assessments can be highly informative, even if brief. When dealing with advanced dementia, the behavioral markers are often overtly visible. Liam pulled a sheet of paper from the folder. Let us talk about those behavioral markers, Doctor. In your sworn affidavit, you cited Constance's irrational hostility toward trusted family members and sudden paranoia regarding her finances as key indicators of cognitive collapse. Are those the exact symptoms Gregory Sterling reported to you? Yes, Dr. Thorne confirmed, nodding to the judge. The son reported a sudden aggressive deterioration in her capacity to trust her primary caretakers. I see, Liam said, turning his gaze toward Gregory. My father was no longer smirking. The color was slowly draining from his face. Doctor, did Gregory Sterling inform you that this sudden paranoia regarding her finances coincided precisely with Constance freezing his access to her accounts after discovering a $12 million discrepancy? Vance Gregory's attorney shot up from his chair. Objection, Your Honor. Relevance. This is a medical evaluation, not a financial audit. The financial context is entirely relevant to the witness's diagnosis, Your Honor, Liam countered smoothly. The petitioner has presented a medical opinion based entirely on his self-reported history. We have the right to examine the veracity of that history. Overruled, Judge Harrison stated, her eyes fixed intently on Dr. Thorne. You may answer the question, Counselor. Dr. Thorne, Liam repeated, his voice dropping to a low, lethal register. Did the petitioner inform you that Constance had locked him out of her trusts because she suspected him of embezzlement? No. Dr. Thorne admitted, his confident facade beginning to fracture. I was not informed of any specific financial disputes. So you diagnosed a woman with advanced dementia based on her son's claim that she was paranoid about her money without ever verifying if her suspicion was actually justified, Liam stated, letting the words hang in the heavy courtroom air. That seems like an incredibly convenient diagnosis, Doctor, almost as convenient as your consulting fee. Liam pulled another document from the folder and projected it onto the large courtroom monitor. It was a financial ledger from Gregory's personal checking account. Dr. Thorne, according to these bank records, Gregory Sterling wired you $75,000 on September 10th. 3 days later, you submitted this sworn medical declaration to the court supporting his petition for conservatorship. Is that correct? Dr. Thorne swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward Vance. I am a highly specialized concierge physician. My consulting fees are commensurate with my expertise and the expedited nature of the evaluation. $75,000 for a 5-minute conversation at a security gate. Liam clarified, his tone laced with absolute disgust. You did not conduct a medical exam. You conducted a transaction. You sold a diagnosis to a desperate man looking for a legal weapon to strip his mother of her autonomy. Vance was on his feet again. Objection. Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained, Judge Harrison said, but her tone was sharp. She was staring at the bank transfer on the monitor, her brow furrowed in deep, visible anger. She had dealt with greedy heirs before, but the blatant nature of this medical transaction clearly crossed a line. Liam did not need to push Dr. Thorne any further. He had completely decimated the doctor's credibility, exposing him as a highly paid mercenary rather than an objective medical professional. I have no further questions for this witness, Your Honor, Liam said, turning his back on Dr. Thorne. As the disgraced doctor hurried out of the witness box, Liam approached the bench. He carried 3 thick sealed envelopes. Your Honor, the petitioner has attempted to paint a tragic picture of cognitive decline based on fraudulent hearsay and a purchased diagnosis, Liam stated, handing the envelopes to the court clerk. We submit into evidence defense exhibits A, B, and C. These are comprehensive independent psychological and neurological evaluations conducted over the past 5 days. Gregory leaned forward at the petitioner table, panic finally breaking through his carefully constructed mask of the concerned son. Barbara gripped his arm, her knuckles white. Preston stared at the floor, looking physically ill. These evaluations, Liam continued, his voice echoing through the silent courtroom, were conducted by Dr. Eris Vance, the chief of neurology at Johns Hopkins, Dr. Elena Rostova, the director of geriatric psychiatry at the Mayo Clinic, and Dr. Marcus Thorne, a leading cognitive specialist at Stanford Medical Center. 3 of the most respected, unassailable medical minds in the country. Judge Harrison opened the first envelope, her eyes scanning the dense medical report. And what were their findings, counselor? She asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Their findings are unanimous and unequivocal, Liam declared, turning to look directly at Constance, who sat perfectly poised at the respondent table. Constance Sterling is in absolute pristine mental health. Her executive function, memory retention, and cognitive processing are functioning at the 99th percentile for her age demographic. She does not have vascular dementia. She does not have paranoia. She is entirely, indisputably capable of managing her own legal and financial affairs. Liam paused, letting the silence amplify the magnitude of his statement. Then he delivered the final blow to Gregory's medical narrative. The only thing Constance Sterling is suffering from, Your Honor, is the profound disappointment of discovering her son and grandson are attempting to defraud her. The courtroom erupted into a chaotic murmur. Vance frantically flipped through his copies of the neurological reports, desperately searching for a loophole, a technicality, anything to salvage their rapidly disintegrating case. But there was nothing. The reports were ironclad, backed by extensive MRI scans, cognitive testing batteries, and hours of recorded psychiatric interviews. Constance had subjected herself to the most grueling medical scrutiny possible, solely to ensure her absolute victory in this courtroom. Gregory slumped back in his chair, the gray suit suddenly looking far too big for his deflated frame. His entire legal strategy hinged on the judge believing Constance was a confused, helpless old woman. Liam had just proven that Constance was sharper, smarter, and infinitely more capable than the men trying to steal her empire. Judge Harrison slammed her gavel, silencing the whispers in the gallery. She glared down at the petitioner table, her expression terrifying in its absolute judicial fury. Mr. Vance, the judge said, her voice dripping with contempt. You filed an emergency ex parte petition based on a medical affidavit that your client purchased for $75,000 from a doctor who never conducted a physical exam. You bypassed standard legal procedure by claiming an imminent threat to the conservatee's well-being when in reality, the only threat to her well-being appears to be sitting at your table. Vance scrambled to his feet, stammering a defense. Your Honor, my clients acted in good faith based on the behavioral history they observed. The sudden isolation, the hostility, Save it, counselor, Judge Harrison snapped, cutting him off completely. The medical evidence presented by the respondent is definitive. The temporary conservatorship order is hereby lifted immediately. Constance Sterling's accounts are unfrozen, and her full legal autonomy is restored. A wave of profound relief washed over me. I looked at Constance. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. She simply gave a single sharp nod of acknowledgement. She had known the medical reports would clear her name. But the medical defense was only the first phase of Liam's strategy. They had defeated the conservatorship petition, but they had not yet annihilated the petitioners. Your Honor, Liam said, stepping back to the podium. The courtroom, which had just begun to settle, immediately tensed again. Liam's posture indicated he was nowhere near finished. The calm, methodical defense attorney had vanished. The ruthless prosecutor had arrived, while the medical evaluations conclusively proved Constance's mental fitness. Liam continued, his dark eyes locking onto Gregory. They do not explain the sudden aggressive nature of the petitioner's filing. They do not explain why a son would attempt to legally silence his mother mere days after a devastating hurricane. Vance jumped up. Objection. The conservatorship has been denied. The petitioner's motivations are no longer relevant to this proceeding. They are entirely relevant, Your Honor, Liam countered, his voice ringing with absolute authority. The petitioner has accused my client Avery of elder abuse manipulation and grand theft. He has stated under oath that Avery isolated Constance to steal the family fortune. We intend to prove that the exact opposite is true. We intend to prove that Gregory Sterling filed this fraudulent petition to cover up his own massive systemic elder financial abuse. Judge Harrison stared at Liam for a long moment, the tension in the room thickening until it was almost suffocating. She looked at Gregory, who was now sweating profusely, then back to Liam. Overruled, Judge Harrison stated, her voice tight with anticipation. I want to hear exactly what motivated this court filing, counselor. Call your next witness. Liam turned toward the respondent table, his eyes meeting mine. The fear I had carried onto that flooded porch was completely gone. I was ready. The defense calls Avery to the stand. I stood up from the heavy oak chair at the respondent table, smoothing the front of my dark blazer. My legs were perfectly steady. Walking past the petitioner table, I could feel the heat of my father's glare burning into the side of my face, but I did not turn my head. I climbed the 3 wooden steps to the witness box, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the whole truth. Liam stood at the podium. He did not look at his notes. He looked at me with the focused intensity of a tactician ready to deploy his greatest weapon. Avery, Liam began, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room. Your father testified under oath that on the afternoon of September 8th, you arrived at his beachfront estate in a state of violent hysteria. He claimed you demanded cash, stole their only evacuation vehicle, and abandoned your family to die in a Category 4 hurricane. Is this testimony accurate? I looked directly at Judge Harrison. No, Your Honor. It is a complete fabrication. Liam took a few steps toward the jury box area, though there was no jury present today, controlling the physical space of the room. Let us establish the reality of that afternoon. Why did you drive into a mandatory evacuation zone? I went to help them secure the property, I stated calmly. I spent 3 hours hauling patio furniture, taping glass, and preparing the exterior for the storm surge. When I went inside, my sister Brittany demanded I hand over the keys to my heavy-duty vehicle so she could pack her designer handbag collection. And when you refused to surrender your vehicle for her luxury accessories, what happened? Liam asked. My father screamed at me for bullying my sister, I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. He ordered me to surrender the keys or leave the property immediately. I chose to leave. I walked out the front doors onto the porch to return to my vehicle. Liam stopped pacing. He turned to face Gregory and Barbara, who were whispering frantically to their attorney, Vance. And did you drive away Avery? I did not, I said. Because the moment I stepped onto the porch, my parents locked the deadbolts behind me. Vance jumped to his feet, slamming his hand on the table. Objection. This is an outrageous and unsubstantiated narrative designed to smear my clients. The petitioner has already testified that the storm shutters suffered a mechanical malfunction due to the power grid failure. Liam did not even look at Vance. Your Honor, we have physical evidence that not only substantiates my client's testimony, but conclusively proves the petitioner committed felony perjury in this very courtroom today. Judge Harrison leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. She looked at Vance, gesturing for him to sit down. I will allow it, Counselor. Present your evidence. Liam signaled the court clerk. Your Honor, Defense Exhibit D is a pristine high-definition video and audio recording captured by the Ring Doorbell Pro system installed at the petitioner's residence. As a data privacy consultant, my client personally installed this system 2 years ago and maintains sole administrative access to its cloud servers. This footage was recorded entirely independently of the local power grid as the camera was hardwired to the estate's backup generator. Gregory went entirely rigid. The color instantly vanished from his face, leaving him looking like a sick, gray ghost. Beside him, Barbara clutched her purse so tightly her knuckles turned stark white. They had completely forgotten about the camera. Or worse, they had assumed that because they could not remember their own passwords, the digital record was somehow erased by the storm. Play the video. Judge Harrison commanded, her voice dropping to a dangerous register. The large flat-screen monitor mounted on the courtroom wall flickered to life. The audio kicked in first, echoing through the sterile judicial chamber. The sound was horrifying. It was the deafening, violent shriek of a Category 4 hurricane tearing apart the coastline. The wind howled through the courtroom speakers, bringing the terrifying reality of the storm right to the judge's bench. The video showed me standing on the expansive mahogany porch, my yellow raincoat battered by the wind. The camera angle perfectly captured the front doors and the glass panels surrounding them. Then the audio picked up the unmistakable heavy mechanical thud of the interior deadbolts slamming shut. The entire courtroom watched as the digital version of me turned around, utter shock registering on my face. I watched myself pound my fists against the reinforced glass. Liam let the video play without interruption. He wanted the judge to hear exactly what was said next. Through the internal microphone of the smart home system, my father's voice boomed clearly over the courtroom speakers. You want to act like a defiant brat? You can stay out there until you learn your place. Slide the keys through the mail slot, or you ride out the storm on the deck. A collective audible gasp rippled through the gallery. Judge Harrison sat frozen, her eyes locked on the monitor. On the screen, my mother stepped into the frame. Barbara stood in the warm, safe light of the foyer. Her pristine cashmere sweater and perfectly styled hair stood in stark contrast to the violent, freezing chaos just inches away on the other side of the glass. The camera captured her expression perfectly. It was not panic. It was not fear. It was a cold, triumphant sneer of absolute control. The courtroom watched in dead silence as Barbara leaned close to the glass. The microphone picked up her voice with crystal-clear precision. Learn some respect. Immediately after she spoke those words, she raised her hand and pressed her finger against the smart home control panel mounted on the wall. The heavy mechanical groan of the industrial storm shutters vibrated through the audio feed. The camera captured the thick metal curtain beginning its descent from the porch ceiling. The video showed me falling to my knees, screaming in pure terror as the gap between the metal and the floor rapidly closed. It showed my mother turning her back and walking away, leaving her daughter to be crushed or drowned by the Atlantic Ocean. The video ended with the sickening final thud of the steel shutters hitting the concrete deck, plunging the screen into total blackness. Liam tapped a button on his remote, pausing the screen on the pitch-black final frame. He let the absolute silence of the courtroom stretch for 10 agonizing seconds. No one moved. No one spoke. The sheer, terrifying reality of what my parents had done hung in the air like a physical weight. I looked at the petitioner table. Gregory was staring blindly at his hands, his chest heaving with panicked, shallow breaths. Barbara had buried her face in her hands, attempting to hide from the devastating exposure of her own cruelty. Preston looked like he was about to physically vomit. Vance stood up. His movements were slow, robotic, and entirely devoid of the slick confidence he had carried just 30 minutes prior. He looked at the black monitor, then at the judge. Your Honor, Vance stammered, his voice cracking. I need a brief recess to confer with my clients. Sit down, Mr. Vance, Judge Harrison snapped, her voice cracked like a whip echoing off the wood-paneled walls. The sheer fury radiating from the bench was palpable. She glared down at my parents with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, directing her wrath entirely at my father. You sat in my courtroom, placed your hand on a Bible, and swore under penalty of perjury that your daughter stole your vehicle and abandoned you to die. You swore she was a predatory, unstable danger to your mother. Yet I just watched you and your wife intentionally lock your own child outside in a catastrophic, deadly weather event over a dispute regarding car keys and designer handbags. Gregory opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He raised his hands in a weak defensive gesture, completely stripped of his arrogant superiority. Do not speak, Judge Harrison commanded, cutting him off before he could even try to formulate an excuse. You have weaponized this court. You have submitted fraudulent testimony to secure a conservatorship over your mother, painting yourself as a loving protector. This video demonstrates a level of depravity and malicious endangerment that borders on attempted manslaughter. Liam stepped back to the podium. He did not let the momentum die. He knew that destroying their victim facade was only the first half of the execution. The emotional devastation was complete, but the financial annihilation was next. Your Honor, Liam said, his voice ringing with lethal authority. The petitioner's cruelty toward his daughter is deeply disturbing, but it is only the symptom of a much larger, far more dangerous disease. Gregory Sterling did not file this emergency conservatorship petition because he was worried about Constance's health. He filed this petition because 3 days ago Constance discovered his secret, and she froze the bank accounts he was using to fund his lifestyle. Vance tried to object again, but his heart was clearly not in it. Objection, Your Honor. This is wildly outside the scope of the original petition. Overruled, Judge Harrison said instantly, her eyes fixed on Liam. Counsel, what secret are you referring to? Liam reached into his briefcase and withdrew the massive 500-page binder of forensic financial audits. He held it up for the entire courtroom to see. The thick spine of the binder represented 5 years of painstaking, undeniable digital tracking. Your Honor, the defense submits into evidence Exhibit E. Liam announced, his dark eyes locking onto my golden child brother Preston, who was now trembling visibly at the petitioner table. This binder contains certified bank records, offshore routing data, and encrypted digital authorization logs. It proves that for the past 5 years, Gregory Sterling and his son Preston Sterling have been operating a highly sophisticated international money laundering ring. A fresh wave of shocked murmurs swept through the gallery. Even the bailiffs looked stunned. They did not just embezzle money, Liam continued, his voice echoing with absolute uncompromising justice. They systematically siphoned over $12 million directly from Constance Sterling's Pediatric Oncology Foundation. They stole money meant for dying children, routed it through shell companies in the Cayman Islands, and used it to purchase luxury yachts, sports cars, and the very beachfront mansion that the hurricane just destroyed. Liam walked toward the judge's bench and handed the massive binder to the court clerk. They filed this fraudulent conservatorship to declare Constance mentally incompetent so they could seize total control of the estate and bury their financial crimes forever. Liam concluded, turning to face my completely ruined family. But they failed. They left my client in the storm, assuming she would wash away. Instead, she brought the hurricane right into this courtroom. I sat in the witness box, looking down at the people who had terrorized me for 33 years. The illusion of their power was dead. The facade of their perfect family was shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. They had tried to bury me, but they had dug their own graves. The courtroom was silent, save for the hum of the air conditioning and the rapid, panicked breathing of Gregory Sterling. My father stared blankly at the massive 500-page binder Liam had just handed to the court clerk. The binder was not a prop. It was a loaded weapon, packed with irrefutable, deeply researched financial data, and its target was the very foundation of my family's fraudulent wealth. Judge Harrison adjusted her glasses, peering down at the thick document now resting on her bench. Counsel, she said, her voice taut with controlled anger. Are you prepared to walk this court through the specific allegations contained in Exhibit E? Because what you have just suggested constitutes a massive, systemic, and highly criminal enterprise. I am entirely prepared, Your Honor, Liam replied, stepping away from the podium and moving toward the center of the courtroom floor. He projected the first financial summary onto the large monitor, replacing the paused, horrific image of the Ring doorbell video. The new image was a stark black and white spreadsheet detailing the cash flow of the Pediatric Oncology Foundation over the past 5 years. Your Honor, Liam began, his tone surgical and devastatingly clear. The petitioner, Gregory Sterling, has served as a primary trustee for Constance Sterling's charitable foundations since 2018. During that time, he utilized a fictitious vendor, a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, under the name Apex Global Consulting, to systematically siphon funds intended for pediatric cancer research. Vance scrambled to his feet again, his face slick with sweat. He was a high-priced attorney, but he was drowning. Objection, Your Honor. This is an ambush. We have had no time to review these documents. They are entirely unverified. They are certified bank records, Mr. Vance. Judge Harrison snapped, her patience completely exhausted. Objection overruled. Proceed, counsel. Liam tapped a button on his remote, highlighting a series of massive withdrawals. Between 2019 and the present day, Gregory Sterling authorized 142 separate wire transfers from the Foundation's primary operating accounts to the Apex Shell Corporation. The average transfer was $80,000. However, the largest transfer occurred just 18 months ago. Liam switched the slide. The new image showed a single massive wire transfer. On March 4th of last year, Gregory Sterling authorized a $2 million disbursement to Apex Global Consulting under the guise of an international research grant. Liam turned and pointed directly at my father. That $2 million transfer matches down to the exact cent the deposit Gregory Sterling made 3 days later to a high-end luxury contractor in South Carolina. He used money meant to save dying children to build a custom glass-enclosed entertainment wing on his beachfront mansion, the very same wing that was destroyed by the hurricane. The gallery erupted in gasps. The sheer grotesque cruelty of the embezzlement was staggering. My mother Barbara shrank in her chair, pressing a hand to her mouth. She had known about the money, of course. She had worn the designer clothes and driven the luxury cars it bought. But hearing the origin of the funds stated so plainly in a court of law was entirely different. And he did not orchestrate this complex international money laundering operation alone. Liam continued, his voice echoing like a judge reading a final sentence. He turned his gaze toward Preston. My golden child brother had always managed to stay out of the direct line of fire, letting our parents fight the battles while he reaped the rewards. Not today. Today, Preston was entirely exposed. Your Honor, if you turn to Section 4 of the binder, Liam instructed, you will find the digital authorization logs for every offshore transfer associated with the Apex Shell Company. Every single wire transfer requires a dual authorization protocol involving encrypted digital signatures. Liam pulled up a new slide showing a complex string of IP addresses and digital signatures. These IP addresses trace directly back to a luxury condominium in downtown Boston. A condominium owned and occupied by the petitioner's son, Preston Sterling. Preston Sterling designed the corporate structure of the Apex Shell Company, managed the Cayman Islands routing protocols, and personally authorized every fraudulent disbursement. Preston looked like he was going to vomit. He gripped the edge of the petitioner table, his knuckles bone white. He was a coward, and the reality of his criminal exposure was completely paralyzing him. Your Honor, Liam concluded, returning to the podium, Gregory and Preston Sterling filed this emergency conservatorship petition to permanently silence Constance Sterling. They knew the audit window for the foundation was approaching, and they needed total undisputed control of the estate to bury their $12 million embezzlement ring. They attempted to weaponize this court, and they attempted to destroy my client's reputation to achieve that goal. Judge Harrison stared at the petitioner table. The silence that followed Liam's presentation was heavier than the hurricane. The judge picked up her pen, made a single sharp notation in her ledger, and then looked down at Gregory. Mr. Sterling, Judge Harrison said, her voice shaking with barely contained fury, In my 20 years on the bench, I have dealt with greedy heirs. I have dealt with entitled children fighting over inheritances. But the level of malicious, coordinated, and thoroughly documented financial elder abuse and fraud presented here today is staggering. She turned her gaze to Vance, who looked physically ill. Mr. Vance, I strongly suggest you advise your clients to retain highly specialized criminal defense counsel immediately. Judge Harrison slammed her gavel down with a sharp, echoing crack. The petition for conservatorship is denied with prejudice. The temporary freeze on Constance Sterling's accounts is lifted permanently. Furthermore, based on the certified financial records submitted into evidence, I am immediately referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office and the Internal Revenue Service for federal investigation into wire fraud, tax evasion, and elder financial abuse. Gregory stood up, panic completely overwhelming him. Your Honor, please. You have to understand. I understand perfectly, Mr. Sterling. The judge cut him off, her tone absolutely lethal. You are dismissed. Get out of my courtroom before I hold you in contempt and have the bailiffs detain you right now. My father stood frozen for a second, the reality of his total annihilation crashing down on him. Then Barbara grabbed his arm, pulling him frantically toward the heavy wooden doors. Preston scrambled after them, nearly tripping over his own feet in his desperation to escape. They fled the courtroom, a broken, defeated, utterly ruined family. I sat at the respondent table, my heart pounding a steady, powerful rhythm. The hurricane was over. The floodwaters had receded, and I had completely, absolutely destroyed them. Liam closed his briefcase with a sharp snap. He looked at me, a rare, genuine smile breaking through his professional demeanor. We did it, Avery. Constance placed her hand over mine. It was the first physical contact she had initiated since pulling me into the armored SUV. Her grip was strong, surprisingly warm, and filled with an undeniable fierce pride. You fought well today, Avery, Constance said softly. You did not just survive the storm, you commanded it. I looked at the empty petitioner table. They had locked me out, assuming I was weak, assuming I was disposable. They had drastically underestimated the quiet daughter they had pushed aside for 33 years. I squeezed Constance's hand, feeling the solid, unyielding strength of the woman who had truly saved me. Let us go home, I said. As we walked out of the courtroom, the air felt lighter, the marble corridor stretching before me bright and clear. The battle was won. The war was over. The family I had been born into was dead to me, but the family I had chosen was standing right beside me, ready to build an empire. The fallout was instantaneous and absolute. In the days following the probate hearing, the carefully constructed facade of my family's wealthy, untouchable existence completely evaporated. Because Gregory and Preston had initiated the legal action by filing the conservatorship petition, all the subsequent rulings and submitted evidence became public record. Liam did not need to leak anything to the press. The local journalists and financial bloggers who regularly monitored the county probate dockets found the explosive ruling within 24 hours. The story hit the local news cycle like a second hurricane. The headlines were ruthless. Prominent businessman accused of siphoning millions from dying children. Sterling family matriarch foils multi-million-dollar embezzlement plot. The narrative my mother had so carefully cultivated, the tragic, resilient family victimized by a cruel daughter, was instantly, irrevocably destroyed. The first domino to fall was the fraudulent GoFundMe campaign. As soon as the judge's ruling hit the public record, dozens of furious donors reported the page to the platform's trust and safety team. The platform immediately froze the account, citing a violation of their terms of service regarding deceptive fundraising. The $80,000 they had raised was seized and automatically refunded to the donors. Barbara's primary vehicle for public sympathy was shut down, leaving them without the emergency cash they desperately needed to stabilize their ruined beach house. The social ostracization was brutal and swift. My parents had spent their entire lives cultivating relationships based on proximity to power and wealth. Now they were radioactive. The elite country club where Gregory spent his weekends quietly suspended his membership pending the outcome of the federal investigation. Barbara's charity boards and social committees purged her from their rosters, unwilling to be associated with a woman implicated in stealing from a pediatric oncology fund. They were effectively exiled from the only community they cared about. But the most spectacular collapse belonged to my sister Brittany. Brittany had spent the last 2 years planning a lavish $250,000 destination wedding in Lake Como. She was engaged to a junior partner at a prestigious investment firm, a man whose family pedigree matched the wealthy image the Sterlings projected. Her entire identity was wrapped up in being the beautiful, wealthy heiress preparing to marry into another powerful dynasty. The moment the court documents became public, exposing that the Sterling family wealth was a mirage built on embezzled charity funds, Brittany's fiancé panicked. His firm's compliance department flagged the association with Gregory's impending federal fraud case as a catastrophic reputational risk. The fiancé's family, terrified of being linked to the scandal, demanded he sever ties immediately. Brittany was publicly dumped less than 48 hours after the probate hearing. The fiancé's family canceled the wedding venue, rescinded all the vendor deposits, and legally demanded the return of the 6-carat engagement ring. Brittany, who had mocked me for driving a practical truck and had demanded I surrender it to save her handbags, was now left with no car, no fiancé, and a reputation so thoroughly tainted that her high society friends stopped returning her calls. While Brittany faced complete social ruin, Gregory and Preston faced the terrifying reality of the federal justice system. Judge Harrison had kept her promise. The certified financial records proving the massive embezzlement scheme were handed directly over to the district attorney and the regional office of the Internal Revenue Service. The response was swift and overwhelming. Federal agents executed search warrants on Gregory's temporary office space and Preston's luxury condominium in Boston. They seized hard drives, banking records, and encrypted communication devices, securing the digital trail Preston had so arrogantly assumed was hidden. Within a week of the probate hearing, the United States Attorney's Office announced grand jury indictments against both Gregory and Preston Sterling. They were charged with multiple counts of wire fraud conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. The sheer volume of the stolen funds, $12 million siphoned over 5 years, elevated the charges to a level that carried the potential for decades in federal prison. Because the stolen funds had been used to purchase their primary assets, the federal government moved immediately to secure those assets for forfeiture. They slapped liens on Preston's condominium and initiated seizure proceedings on Gregory's custom yacht. The final crushing blow came from the bank holding the mortgage on the ruined beachfront estate. Gregory had stopped paying flood insurance on the ground floor to free up cash for more immediate luxuries, assuming the ocean would never breach the seawall. When the hurricane struck, the storm surge destroyed over $3 million in uninsured renovations and vehicles. With Constance having permanently severed their access to the family trust and the GoFundMe shut down, Gregory had absolutely no liquid capital left to service the massive multi-million-dollar mortgage on the property. The bank, already jittery due to the public fraud indictments, did not offer forbearance. They did not negotiate. The moment Gregory missed his first payment, the bank accelerated the foreclosure process, citing the massive uninsured damage to the property as a breach of the mortgage covenant. My parents were formally evicted from the ruined mansion. They were forced to pack whatever belongings they could salvage from the undamaged second floor and vacate the premises. The house they had prioritized over my life, the fortress where they had locked me out to die, was repossessed by the bank, destined to be sold at a fraction of its value to a developer willing to gut the mold-infested structure. They had lost the money, they had lost the social standing, and they had lost the house. They were completely, absolutely destitute, facing federal prison sentences with no high-priced legal team to defend them, as they could no longer afford the retainers. I watched this spectacular downfall from the quiet safety of Constance's inland estate. I did not gloat. I did not post triumphant messages on social media. I simply watched the inevitable mathematical consequence of their own actions play out in real time. Liam kept me updated on the legal filings and the foreclosure proceedings, treating the destruction of my family's empire as a routine corporate liquidation. They are out of moves, Liam said one afternoon, reviewing a summary of the federal indictments. Their assets are seized or foreclosed, their credit is destroyed, and the public defender's office is currently handling Gregory's arraignment. What about Preston? I asked, looking at the spreadsheet of seized assets. Preston attempted to flee, Constance remarked, walking into the library with a thin, satisfied smile. He tried to board a flight to Dubai using a secondary passport he purchased years ago. Federal agents apprehended him at Logan Airport. He is currently sitting in a holding cell being denied bail because he is now a documented flight risk. The image of my arrogant, entitled brother sitting in a federal holding cell felt surreal. He had spent his entire life coasting on the belief that the sterling name provided absolute immunity. He was currently learning a very harsh lesson about federal jurisdiction. And Gregory and Barbara? I asked, turning back to Liam. They are currently residing in an extended stay motel near the industrial park, Liam replied, his tone clinical. It is the only accommodation they could secure without a credit check or a significant security deposit. An extended stay motel. The people who had sneered at my practical apartment, who had demanded I learn respect while sipping wine behind reinforced glass, were now living in a single room off the interstate. The karmic balance was absolute. But I knew my parents. I knew their pathology. They did not possess the capacity for self-reflection, and they were incapable of accepting defeat gracefully. They were cornered animals stripped of their power and their wealth, and they were desperate. I knew they would try one final desperate maneuver to save themselves. I just didn't know when they would strike. I got my answer the following Tuesday. I was at my private consulting office downtown, having fully resumed my professional duties. The administrative leave had been instantly lifted the moment the court documents clearing my name became public. My managing director had actually called to apologize, offering a substantial bonus to ensure I remained with the firm. I had accepted the apology and the bonus, returning to work with a renewed sense of focus. My assistant buzzed my intercom, her voice tight with tension. Avery, I am so sorry to interrupt. There are 2 people in the lobby demanding to see you. They do not have an appointment, and they are becoming highly agitated. They say they are your parents. The adrenaline spiked instantly, but the fear was completely absent. They had driven to my office. They had bypassed the secure lobby of the building by tailgating an employee, and they were now standing outside my suite demanding an audience. Send them in, I instructed my assistant, my voice cold and steady, and have building security stand by outside the door. I stood up, smoothing my blazer, and walked around my desk to face the door. The final confrontation was here. They had nothing left to lose, but I had everything left to protect, and I was going to make sure they never forgot who held the power now. The heavy glass door of my office swung open. My assistant stepped aside, keeping a firm grip on the door handle as my parents walked into the room. The sheer physical transformation they had undergone in just a few short weeks was absolutely staggering. The polished, arrogant billionaires who had mocked me from behind reinforced hurricane glass were completely gone. In their place stood 2 exhausted, desperate people who looked like they had aged a decade overnight. Gregory wore a faded navy suit that hung awkwardly on his thinning frame. The fabric was cheap and unpressed, a massive downgrade from the bespoke Italian tailoring he usually demanded. His face was hollow, covered in gray stubble, and his hands trembled slightly as he clutched a battered manila folder. Barbara looked even worse. The woman who used to spend thousands of dollars a month on premium skincare and salon appointments now had visible gray roots showing in her unkempt hair. She wore a shapeless brown sweater over plain black slacks. The faint smell of stale motel air conditioning clung to their clothes, completely replacing the expensive signature perfumes they used to wear. I did not offer them a seat. I stood behind my massive mahogany desk, my posture perfectly straight, projecting the absolute authority of a woman who completely owned her space. My office was a testament to the life I had built entirely on my own. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city skyline. The leather furniture, the modern art on the walls, the pristine organization of my workspace. It all screamed success, stability, and power. Gregory tried to take control of the dynamic immediately. He stepped forward and reached for one of the leather guest chairs opposite my desk. "Do not sit down," I commanded. My voice was low, sharp, and completely devoid of warmth. "You are not guests here. You are trespassing. State your business and get out." Gregory froze, his hand hovering over the back of the chair. He swallowed hard, exchanging a panicked look with Barbara. They were not used to me speaking to them this way. They were used to the quiet, obedient daughter who absorbed their abuse without a single word of protest. "Avery, please," Barbara began, her voice cracking as she took a tentative step toward my desk. She clasped her hands together in front of her chest, projecting an image of maternal desperation. "We know you are angry. We know we have made some terrible mistakes, but we are in a completely impossible situation right now. We have lost everything: our home, our savings, our friends. We are living in a single room with a broken air conditioner. It is a nightmare." I stared at her, my expression completely blank. I let the silence stretch out, forcing her to sit in the unbearable awkwardness of her own making. Narcissists absolutely hate silence. It forces them to keep talking, to keep filling the void until they eventually expose their true intentions. When I did not offer any sympathy, Gregory stepped in, attempting to salvage the pitch. "Avery, the federal prosecutors are being completely unreasonable. They have frozen every single asset we have ever touched. They are trying to pin Preston's entire offshore operation on me. The public defender they assigned to my case is a joke. He wants me to take a plea deal that includes 10 years in a federal penitentiary. 10 years, Avery. I will die in prison." He paused, waiting for me to gasp or offer comfort. I simply raised one eyebrow, waiting for the inevitable demand. "We need a real defense team." Gregory continued, his voice growing more frantic as he realized I was not going to help him along. "We have spoken to a top-tier white-collar criminal defense firm downtown. They reviewed the indictment and they believe they can negotiate the charges down, maybe keep me out of prison entirely. But they will not even look at the files until we pay a massive retainer. They want $250,000 up front." Barbara took another step closer, tears welling up in her eyes. Real, genuine tears born of absolute self-pity. "Avery, we do not have a single dime left. The bank took the cars. The state seized the remaining jewelry. Your grandmother refuses to take our calls, and Liam threatened to have us arrested for harassment if we show up at the estate again. Brittany's fiancé left her, and Preston is sitting in a holding cell. We have nobody else to turn to." I looked at the two of them, marveling at the sheer, unadulterated audacity required to stand in my office and make this request. "So you came to me," I stated, my voice echoing slightly in the large room. "You bypassed security, invaded my place of business, and interrupted my workday to ask me for $250,000. It is not a gift," Gregory said, quickly opening his battered manila folder. "It is a loan, a strict business arrangement. I have drawn up a promissory note. As soon as the misunderstanding with Constance is cleared up and the assets are unfrozen, we will pay you back with interest. You have a highly successful firm now, Avery. Your grandmother made sure you are financially secure. $250,000 is nothing to you now. It is a drop in the bucket." Barbara reached out, placing her trembling hands on the edge of my desk. "Family helps family, Avery. Please. You are our daughter. I gave you life. We raised you. We provided for you for 18 years. You cannot just abandon us when we are facing the total destruction of our lives. We are begging you. Please have some mercy." I looked at my mother's tear-stained face, then at my father's desperate, pleading eyes. They were invoking the sacred bond of family to extort money from the very daughter they had tried to destroy. It was the ultimate display of toxic entitlement. I slowly pulled out my chair and sat down. I opened the top drawer of my desk and retrieved a single crisp sheet of high-quality printer paper. I placed it face down on the desk, resting my fingertips on the smooth surface. "Family helps family," I repeated softly, testing the words on my tongue. "You want mercy. You want $250,000 to save yourselves from the consequences of stealing from dying children." Gregory nodded enthusiastically, completely missing the dangerous tone in my voice. "Yes, Exactly. We just need this one loan to get our lives back on track. We can be a real family again. I flipped the piece of paper over and slid it across the polished mahogany desk. It came to a stop right in front of Barbara's hands. Barbara looked down. The color instantly drained from her face. She let out a sharp, choked gasp and took a massive step backward, as if the paper had physically burned her. Gregory leaned over to look at it, his jaw dropping open in sheer horror. It was a full-color, high-resolution printed screenshot. The image clearly displayed the viral Facebook post my mother had published the day after the hurricane. It showed the fraudulent GoFundMe campaign they had launched to steal money from our community. Every single venomous lie they had typed about me was highlighted in bright yellow marker. I kept my eyes locked on Barbara as I recited her own words back to her from memory. In a fit of inexplicable rage, she demanded we hand over our cash and valuables. When we refused, she stole our only viable evacuation vehicle and drove away right as the storm hit. She left her own sister, her father, and me stranded with no way to escape the rising water. I leaned forward, planting my elbows on the desk. "You posted that for the entire world to see," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying, lethal whisper. "You actively attempted to destroy my career. You attempted to destroy my reputation. You framed me for grand theft auto and elder abuse. You filed a fraudulent conservatorship petition to have me investigated as a criminal predator. And you did all of that 3 days after you manually locked the deadbolts on your front door and left me to drown in a Category 4 hurricane." "Avery, please," Barbara sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "We were desperate. We were panicked. We did not know what we were doing." "You knew exactly what you were doing," I countered, cutting through her pathetic excuses. "You wanted to bury me to protect your stolen wealth. But you failed. You lost the money. You lost the house. You lost your social standing. And now you are going to lose your freedom." Gregory slammed his fist on the desk, his true violent nature finally breaking through the pathetic victim facade. "You owe us. I am your father. You have millions of dollars sitting in your accounts right now because of my mother. You will write that check, Avery. You will not let your own parents rot in a federal prison." I stood up, towering over him from my side of the desk. I pressed a button on my intercom system. "Security," I said clearly. "Send the team to my suite immediately. I have 2 hostile trespassers who need to be removed from the premises." Barbara let out a hysterical wail. "Avery, no! You cannot do this! We have nothing! We have nowhere to go! You are sentencing us to death! Please have some respect for your mother." I looked Barbara dead in the eyes. I remembered the freezing ocean water rising to my chest. I remembered the terrifying darkness of the storm. I remembered the cold, triumphant sneer on her face as she pressed the button to lower the heavy steel storm shutters. "Learn some respect," I said calmly. The glass doors to my suite burst open. 3 massive building security guards marched into the office. They did not treat Gregory and Barbara like wealthy, important VIPs. They treated them like the desperate vagrants they had become. The guards grabbed my father by the arms, dragging him backward as he shouted incoherent threats. Another guard took Barbara by the shoulders, steering her firmly toward the exit while she wept uncontrollably. I stood silently behind my desk and watched them being physically hauled out of my office. They stumbled through the lobby, causing a massive scene as my employees stared at the commotion. The heavy glass doors swung shut behind them, sealing them outside in the hallway. The office fell completely silent. The scent of cheap motel soap lingered in the air for a brief second before the expensive ventilation system swept it away. I picked up the printed screenshot of their Facebook post, folded it neatly in half, and dropped it into the shredder next to my desk. The machine whirred to life, chewing the paper into tiny, unrecognizable pieces. I smoothed the front of my blazer, took a deep, cleansing breath, and sat back down in my leather chair. The final ghosts of my past had been completely eradicated. I turned my attention back to my computer monitor, ready to conquer the rest of the day. 1 year had passed since the hurricane tore through the coast and washed away the rotting foundation of my family. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the master suite of Constance's estate, adjusting the delicate diamond clasp of my evening gown. It was a custom piece, dark emerald green silk that moved like water. The woman looking back at me was completely unrecognizable from the soaking, terrified girl who had clung to a concrete pillar, begging her parents for her life. That girl had been a victim of circumstance, trapped by biological obligation. The woman standing here tonight was an architect of her own destiny. Liam stepped up behind me, dressed in a sharp black tuxedo. He rested his hands lightly on my waist, his dark eyes meeting mine in the mirror. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low and incredibly steady. "More than ready," I replied, turning to face him. The past 12 months had been a masterclass in reconstruction. Following the absolute annihilation of Gregory and Preston in federal court, Constance had formally restructured her entire estate. I was no longer just the estranged granddaughter. I had been legally named the sole trustee and primary heir to the sterling $2 billion empire. Constance had not handed me the reins because she pitied me. She had handed them to me because I had proven in the fires of absolute crisis that I possessed the exact kind of ruthless, calculating intelligence required to protect her legacy. But I had not just protected it, I had transformed it. When the federal government seized Gregory's yacht, the beachfront property, and Preston's luxury condominium, Liam and I had initiated a complex legal maneuver to reclaim the specific funds embezzled from the Pediatric Oncology Foundation. It took months of aggressive litigation, but we succeeded. We repatriated the $12 million. But instead of simply dumping the cash back into the Foundation's general operating fund, Constance and I had decided to establish a new, highly specialized branch of her philanthropic network. We called it the Coastal Resiliency Trust. It was a foundation dedicated entirely to providing immediate, no-questions-asked emergency housing and financial assistance to families displaced by catastrophic hurricanes. The poetic justice of the initiative was not lost on anyone. My parents had locked me outside in a Category 4 storm because they valued their luxury possessions over my life. Now the very money they had stolen to fund their arrogant lifestyle was actively building safe, fortified shelters for people who had lost everything to the ocean. Tonight was the inaugural gala for the Coastal Resiliency Trust. We were hosting it right here at Constance's inland estate. The sprawling grounds had been transformed into an elegant, breathtaking venue. Massive white tents glowed with warm golden light against the darkening evening sky. A string quartet played softly in the background, and the air smelled of expensive catering and fresh orchids. I took Liam's arm and we walked down the grand mahogany staircase together. The transition from brilliant legal counsel to romantic partner had happened naturally, an inevitable evolution born of late nights auditing shell companies and long strategy sessions in the library. Liam was the first person in my life who did not view my intelligence or my boundaries as an inconvenience. He saw my strength and he matched it perfectly. As we stepped out onto the main terrace, a quiet hum of conversation washed over us. The guest list was meticulously curated. There were no fake socialites, no toxic relatives, and no fair-weather friends who had participated in my mother's viral smear campaign. The people gathered here tonight were genuine allies. The philanthropic leaders who actually did the work, the federal prosecutors who had helped secure the convictions, and the fiercely loyal circle of chosen friends I had built in my life before the hurricane. I spotted Constance holding court near the center of the terrace. At 83, she remained an absolute force of nature. She wore a stunning silver gown, a glass of champagne in hand, holding a group of high-profile donors in rapt attention. When she saw me approaching, she excused herself and walked over. "You look magnificent, Avery," Constance said, her sharp blue eyes shining with genuine pride. "The setup is flawless. The initial donation pledges are already exceeding our projections." "Thank you, Constance," I replied, squeezing her hand. "We built something good out of the wreckage." "We built exactly what was necessary," Constance corrected gently. "You excised a cancer from this family, Avery. Do not ever underestimate the magnitude of what you accomplished." The mention of the family did not trigger the old familiar pang of anxiety. The emotional severing was absolute. Gregory and Preston were currently serving the first year of their 15-year sentences in a federal penitentiary. Their appeals had been summarily denied. Barbara, having narrowly avoided federal charges by testifying against her own husband and son in a desperate plea deal, was living in a subsidized apartment on the outskirts of the city, working as a receptionist at a low-rent dental clinic. Brittany, entirely stripped of her trust fund, and her wealthy fiancé had moved out of state, desperately trying to reinvent herself away from the scandal that permanently stained the sterling name. They had tried to destroy me to protect their perfect wealthy facade. Now they were entirely erased from the narrative of success and power they had so ruthlessly worshipped. I excused myself from Constance and Liam, grabbing a glass of champagne from a passing server, and walked to the edge of the terrace. The estate sat on the highest elevation in the county. From this vantage point, I could see the distant dark line of the ocean horizon. It looked calm tonight, peaceful under the scattered stars. I thought about the terrifying roar of the wind on that flooded porch. I thought about the freezing water rising to my chest and the terrifying realization that the people who were supposed to protect me had intentionally locked me out to die. The trauma of that night had fundamentally changed me, but it had not broken me. It had stripped away every last illusion I held about conditional love and familial obligation. It had forced me to rely entirely on my own grit, my own intelligence, and my own absolute refusal to be a victim. I had walked onto that porch as a quiet, accommodating daughter who was constantly trying to earn a place at a table that was actively rigged against her. I walked off that porch as a woman who realized she didn't need a seat at their table because she was entirely capable of building her own empire. Liam stepped up beside me, breaking my reverie. He didn't say anything immediately. He just stood there looking out at the same dark ocean, his presence a steady, solid anchor. "They asked about you today," Liam said quietly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. I turned my head slightly, immediately knowing who he meant. "The prison sent the notification." "Yes," Liam confirmed. "Gregory filed a formal request for visitation. He wants you to come see him." He cited family reconciliation on the administrative form. I let out a soft, sharp laugh. The absolute staggering audacity of the man. He was sitting in a federal cell because he had stolen millions from dying children, and he still believed he could summon me with a piece of paperwork. He still believed the word family held some kind of mystical power over me. "Did you deny the request?" I asked. "I filed the denial 30 seconds after the notification hit my inbox," Liam replied, turning to look at me. "I informed the warden that any further communication attempts from inmate Sterling to you or Constance would be treated as targeted harassment, and we would pursue administrative segregation." "Good," I said, taking a sip of my champagne. The liquid was cold, crisp, and perfect. "Do you ever wonder what he wanted to say?" Liam asked, his tone devoid of judgment, just genuine curiosity. I looked back out at the ocean. I didn't need to wonder. I knew exactly what Gregory wanted. He wanted money for the commissary. He wanted me to hire an appellate lawyer. He wanted to manipulate my sense of obligation to pull some invisible string and force me back into the role of the dutiful, obedient scapegoat. He wanted to pretend that the steel shutters had never fallen. "No," I answered, my voice carrying the absolute certainty of a woman who had completely reclaimed her power. "I don't wonder at all. Because whatever it is, it's irrelevant. The man who locked me out in the storm no longer exists in my reality. I am only interested in the people who build shelters." I turned away from the dark horizon, turning my back on the ocean and the ghosts of my past. I looked at the brilliantly lit tents, the elegant crowd of chosen friends, and the fierce, brilliant grandmother who had seen my true worth when my own parents had discarded me. I looked at the man standing beside me, the brilliant tactician who had helped me burn the old empire to the ground so we could build something better. "Come on," I said, linking my arm through Liam's. "It is time for my speech." We walked back into the light, stepping smoothly into the vibrant, powerful future we had forged entirely on our own terms. The storm had tried to wash me away. Instead, it had cleared the path for my reign. I am so glad to share this story with you. Life often tests us in ways we never expect. The people who are supposed to protect us can sometimes be the ones who hurt us the most. As my story shows, true security doesn't always come from biological family. It comes from recognizing your own worth and setting boundaries to protect it. In every situation, from being excluded to being abandoned, I learned that my value wasn't defined by their actions but by my resilience. It's crucial to trust your instincts and not be afraid to create distance from toxic environments. Healing is a journey, and part of that journey is learning to surround yourself with people who genuinely care and support you. Always remember that you have the power to redefine your own story. Let the challenges you face be the foundation upon which you build a stronger, more authentic life. If my journey has resonated with you, I would love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to step away from family expectations to find your true self? Please share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of resilience and empowerment.